Chapter 679, Clockwork Scheme. Chapter 679, Clockwork Scheme. Don't rent an apartment, they said, get your own apartment, they said. Well, guess who wasted an entire week pumping money into a black hole of an apartment? The Clockwork City, also known as Sotha Sil, much like its sister cities of Vivec, City of Vivec, and Almalexia, Mournhold, is but a mere shadow of its former self. 200 years ago, the god-kings of Morrowind, the tribunal of Almalexia, Sotha Sil, and Vivec lost their divinity, which they maintained through a yearly pilgrimage to the heart of Lorkhan, deep in the Red Mountain. While they drew divine power from the heart and achieved the status of living divines, or demigods, for thousands of years, they were outdone by an old enemy from an age forgotten, Dagoth Uar. Just like them, Dagoth Uar drew power from the heart, ambushed them on their yearly pilgrimage, and would have annihilated the three of them if not for the cunning of Sotha Sil. Eventually, the three living divines lost their power gradually and were immensely weakened compared to their former selves, while they still held very considerable power as mortals. The incident with Dagoth Uar was resolved by the Nerevarine, who liberated the heart of Lorkhan from the Red Mountain, and by that, he defeated Dagoth Uar and ended the rule of the tribunal. Driven mad by the loss of divinity, Almalexia sought to destroy every divine presence in Morrowind and to install herself as the one true goddess. She attacked the weakened Sotha Sil and killed him in Clockwork City, then she used his machines to wreak havoc in Mournhold, before accusing him of treachery and sending the Nerevarine on a false trail to get rid of him as well. Her plan eventually failed, and she was slain by the recreation of her husband, the Nerevarine, whom she betrayed and killed long ago. But in the end, all of that brought ruin to the once beautiful and glamorous Clockwork City. Nowadays, Clockwork City as a realm has remained barren and drained for around 200 years while completely isolated from the outside world since the divinity of Sotha Sil, which powered the city, is no longer there. This place has taken the theme of steampunk to a completely new meaning as everything in this city was made of metal, powered by steam pipes, and requires coal and oil. The main city isn't called Clockwork City since it is the name of the entire realm, but its functional name is the Brass Fortress, a metropolitan area that holds tall spires, towers, domes, walls, and roads that were all made of metal with the color of brass. There were even brass highways connecting the city to other outside facilities and holding together a monorail network. Factories and refineries dotted the wilderness outside the Brass Fortress to form a great display of industrial prowess. As for vegetation and actual wilderness, the Badlands outside were known as the Radius, a mix of brass deserts, swamplands, and forests, most of which have died after the death of Sotha Sil due to the lack of vitality in this isolated world. Even if it is a digital world, it needs energy to stay alive. Aside from the Brass Fortress and the Radius, the only remaining location was the core of this world, which remains a mystery and certainly can only be accessed from the Brass Fortress that John can't enter right now because of the defense mechanisms that are solely set up to get in his way. On one hand, it may sound like trouble for him, but on the other hand, he can already see his way around it. John's eyes were fixated on Goldbrand for some time, the sword that was dangling from Glymit's side. Even as a Dragonborn, he felt threatened by that sword, the sword that was made to protect the dragons, a sword that can be made into the greatest weapon against dragons. John. While he was focused on his own thoughts, Lonoth started calling for him. Huh! John turned to her, a bit dazed. Don't me. I was telling you about my plan, she said. Nah, I was just thinking about what you told me regarding Winterhold and the Eye of Magnus, John replied. We talked about that a few hours ago, Lonoth said with narrowed eyes. Were you even listening to what I said to begin with? The plan, yes, John said and looked at the map Lonoth was drawing with ink. Whatever it is, it's a bad plan. Fine. Show me what you got then. Lonoth retreated from the table inside the scrap cottage, and started looking at John with sharp eyes as she didn't like being ignored. "All right, everyone, a plan meeting." John clapped his hands and called for the people around. Glymet, who was maintaining his blade, joined them first, while Ram stopped tinkering with some machines and Coda got down off his guard tower, and the two of them came after Glymet. "Gentlemen, lady, I hope you all took your time adjusting. Each of us has a problem on our hands and cooperation is a must. For that to happen, we should review our problems in proper order and set primary objectives to solve accordingly," John said. "But we're only here to find swims," Glymet said. "It's all right, old man, everyone is out here for something. But as you find your friend, you need to get back to Tamriel. Those are two problems you have to solve with only Lonoth and you if you don't wish to cooperate," John explained. "Fine. What do you want?" Glymet asked. "I want Messenger. He hurt one of my people and I swore to get him," John said. "And those two?" Lonoth asked, pointing at Coda and Ram. "Coda wants revenge." The midget Argonian Coda spoke his mind in his weird and funny accent. "Bad people ambushed and killed the Tarnished. They killed Coda's father and kidnapped his sister. A quest for vengeance." John patted Coda on the back. "You may be the first Argonian I actually come to like." Sigh. Meanwhile, Ram shook his mechanical head. "And you, what about you?" Glymet asked Ram. With uncertainty, Ram looked among his odd companions that were forced upon him due to circumstances and couldn't help but feel like lost. Was that the right term? He thought. According to the man who booted him into this world, the Nord called John, it is nothing but ruin where they are now, and their home realm, Tamriel continent, is far away from where this is. His people and his family shouldn't be in this world they are in, and since John stated that this is a world made by Sotha Sil, the only words Ram could actually remember, he realized that a long time has really passed. As for his memories, Ram barely had any. He has a memory crystal in this robotic body of his. It is too ancient but somehow still readable. His ego exists within it and he can recall things well, but it seems that something has blocked access to the rest of his memories. Even the name he is going with now is a name given to him by John. Robotic artillery machine, he calls him, since he fixed his head on the body of a combat factotum, a sort of irony from a man who is from the enemy camp to his family. But according to John, after he ran a test on Ram's head, there is a missing piece in the head that may work as a signal receiver. Whatever signal it may receive, it may hold something vital for Ram. That's what he wanted. Signal. Ram replied at Glymet and pointed towards his head. While his action seemed void of expressions on his metallic face, the fact that Ram wasn't good with the language of those strange people made him uncomfortable beyond sense and awkward at the same time, so he didn't try to do or say any more. He is looking for some sort of communication chip that can be inserted into his head for him to bypass some restrictions on his current information access from his memory crystal and to complete his ego construct. John explained in full academic detail. All right. Glymet nodded with patience. 2 of us want to save a friend, 2 of us want to kill the man who controls the city and have our friend, and 1 of us is looking for whatever that signal or chip is. He then thought for a few seconds. I see most of our goals aligning together. We also won't be able to escape this world with Messner doing what he's doing, and the way out is probably somewhere deep in the Brass Fortress. John added. I am afraid I am tending to agree. Lonoth said, most of the records mentioned that all those who arrive at Clockwork City first arrive at the Brass Fortress. And those who leave? John asked. You'd be surprised how many people never talk about leaving this realm. Lonoth said. All right. John started tabbing with his fingers on the central table in between while thinking before sharing his thoughts. I have put together a plan and was going to execute it with the help of Coda and Ram, but now that you are here, things are looking better. Fine, let's hear it. Lonoth said. With her experiences with John, she is aware that John isn't the strategic type and he leaves most of the planning to his wife, Alina, but in terms of guerrilla tactics and stealth combat, John is a menace to contend with, a master of sabotage and destruction. 200 years after the death of Sotha Sil, Clockwork City started dying. However, it still functions thanks to what we think of as an emergency power supply. That thing is focused only in the region of the Brass Fortress. John said and pointed at the map drawn by Lonath, but it was a small one she drew to fit on a notebook page, and so he asked for help. Ram, the map. Just like that, Ram took his mechanical head off his mechanical body and placed it on the table. From a crystal on his forehead, a bright light was cast on the opposite wall and displayed a map of the entire city. You had me draw a map for an hour and you have that? Lonath looked at John with unbelieving eyes. I had you do nothing, sweetheart. John replied with a mocking expression, admitting on the spot that he left her to draw a map on purpose. So, that's the Brass Fortress. John pointed at the upper half of the map. It is being powered by its own emergency generator while the rest of the realm has mostly died out. We are in the Badlands of Death, so to speak. To enter that city, we must bypass its defenses, and to do so, we need to cut the power from the city or lower it by a little bit. Isn't it dangerous for the realm? Lonath asked. If we hit the emergency generator, this whole reality may collapse. You must remember that this existence relies on that power for this climate to be livable. Barely livable, I must correct you. The air and the water in this realm should have expired long ago. It seems that the ingenious apostles of the Clockwork City have found ways to produce air and water for themselves inside the Brass Fortress, but out here, the pollution and the acid rain are simply disastrous. John explained, then put on his famous mischievous smile. From that point where I will hit their city. John manipulated the map and focused on the area outside the Brass Fortress, the radius. We are here in the southernmost part of the radius. This used to be a camp for the nomadic Tarnished people, and where I found Koda, his village in a way, John said. The others looked around the heap of scrap, and could tell that there were more heaps of scrap here, but it was hard to deduce if any sort of fighting had happened in the area, since it is all just one big scrap yard. This place we are in was known as the Pavilion of Artifice. It used to be a crafting site, and I managed to build some nice tools here. John pointed at this rifle and eye patch that were just for a cool post-apocalyptic steampunk theme. As for now, this place is our hideout. I've set up a small formation to hide me here so that Messner can't spy on me. If I ever leave or do anything around this realm, he will know it and he will ruin it for me since he knows his way better. So you are going to rely on us? Glymet asked. Bingo. Messner is afraid of me and I had Ram and Koda help me, but now, things will get twice as fast. John said, there are a few locations we need to hit. The first is the ventral terminus to the far west, an old facility that seemed ruined for ages, but it has a massive power supply input requirement. If you go there and direct that power to me here in the pavilion, I'll start working on some serious toys to charge at the city. What is the second location? Lonath asked. To the east, there is a big-ass facility called the Halls of Regulation. It is the other facility that requires large power input to function. It is actually for a good cause, since that facility produces breathable air and drinkable water for the entire realm. A win-win for everyone since my water reserve is running low and I can really use a shower and a shave. My beard can grow a full inch every day. And by powering those two facilities, we can lower the shield on the city. Glymet asked. Lower it enough for an attack to threaten them, and while doing so, Messner and his minions will come out and we're gonna hit them where it hurts, John said while performing a swift right hook. No tactics, diversions, backup? Lonath asked. I don't think we can face Messner's force head-on since we are only 5 and I can barely leave this place, unless there is a big distraction enough for Messner to focus on something else other than me. And the risk of this plan? Glymet asked. You go hard or you go home, except that you can't go home, you get what I'm saying? John said. I trust in your skills, so I know you guys won't face much trouble if you take things with proper preparations. Fine, Glymet said. It pains me that both father and son have no head for strategy. Just because you know my ugly-ass father doesn't mean you get to compare us as you please. John shouted at Glymet with irritation. As John turned and walked away, Glymet looked at Lonoth. You don't think he and his father can be mistaken for twins? He asked. Don't let them catch you saying that, she replied with an obvious shudder. Aside from the similarities between father and son, Glymet kept watching John just as carefully as John watched him earlier. If John the elder and John the younger, father and son, had so many similarities in appearance, Glymet managed to sense something that would set the two apart greatly. Much like himself, John Dare has a sensation of fate looming around him, in his actions, in his temperaments. He feels like a force of nature, free and driven, just like how Glymet was in the past. Paragons, heroes, monsters, this is the same sensation of fate which they read on one another. Two heroes in one action, while it sounds like nothing may stop them, it was also something morbid to one of them. Just a reminder, Glymet is the protagonist from the Elder Scrolls. Legends Story Mode, the Forgotten Hero. He is a human with an ambiguous race, and his name is derived from the Norwegian word, glemt, which means forgotten, according to Google Translate. Chapter 680, Clockwork Sabotage. Chapter 680, Clockwork Sabotage. According to John Dare, Clockwork City has been working on emergency power for 200 years, and it is barely enough for the Brass Fortress, the main settlement of this realm, to maintain itself by producing fresh air and clean water. But once the outside facilities, such as the halls of regulation and the ventral terminus, were to be rebooted and start drawing power from the Brass Fortress, its automated defenses would automatically crumble. This will give John, Glymet, Lonoth, Coda, and Ram the opportunity to strike Messner and rescue Swims at night together. But until those two facilities are put on the power grid, John shall stay behind in the hideout tinkering through the next phase of his plan, while the others head out and visit these two locations, starting with the ventral terminus. From its name, the ventral terminus was a place that had a central data terminal that controlled a lot of facilities in the Clockwork City. It has been a long while since these functions have been moved to a location deep within the Brass Fortress, but still, many power and steam lines run through that place. Once Lonoth stepped into the place, she received a warning from Ram. Traps ahead. Ram spoke in a cold mechanical voice. Traps. Curses. Traps. Hateful. Meanwhile, Coda was agitated by the mention of the word. Those two are certainly odd. Glymet commented on the cold behavior of Ram and the hectic personality shifts of Coda. All who befriended John Dare can't be called anything less than odd, Lonoth said while working her magic in the place to find the said trap. I got along with him just fine and I'm pretty normal, Glymet said. These words made Lonoth halt what she was doing, look back at him, sigh while shaking her head, and continue looking for traps. What? He asked. You're just as odd as he is, Lonoth said and kept going forward. Excuse me. Glymet was taken aback. I am but a vagrant, a self-taught mage, and probably the poorest man that ever walked on Tamriel. A vagrant who is welcome in every court of power in the Empire and Hammerfell, a self-taught mage who is on par with an arch-wizard in power, and a poor person who owns some of the most sought artifacts on Tamriel. Lonoth repeated what Glymet is to Glymet. The only difference between you and John is how little you have to lose compared to what he sticks his neck out to protect. Glymet didn't even try to enter an argument with her, and had a few thoughts running in his head. One of them was, so I don't lose more than what I did, and the other, because I can't bear to lose you too, and the other, and the other. He didn't speak any of them though. He even managed to stop himself from thinking and focus on the destination they were on. While the silence continued only to be interrupted by Ram's occasional warnings, the group found themselves getting surrounded by what seemed to be the strange and small dinosaur-like creatures that run on two legs. Their screams were horrific, and their razor-like lines of teeth were the first thing to be seen from them just before they chomp someone's head off. Clanfear. Lonoth recognized the stealthy creatures immediately as a dedralogist and made sure to teleport her party out of the ambush site at once. Once that was done, her three companions went into battle mode almost instantly. Glymet was the fastest to react, and with Goldbrand in his hand, he bounced forwards in a frenzy of hack and slash as if he was letting go of something stressful in his head. On the other hand, the small-bodied Coda banged his warhammer on the ground and shouted, "It's time to wake the fuck up!" In another shift of personality, Coda's body started to reform up close to Lonoth, who watched the transformation earnestly. In a few seconds, the small cute Argonian young man, who was already weirder than anything, became larger than any Argonian of his kin and bullier than a Daedric Ruinak. Runiaks are newly added Daedra in Yeso. They look like Maroon's Dagon from Oblivion but only above human size and look super ugly, like seriously super ugly. Coda moved in an unstoppable momentum and pushed through the Clanfear horde with brutish strength and violent attacks to the point where these pests were actually running from his roars. All of that occurred while Lonoth and Ram were just watching from the back. Just as Lonoth turned to Ram to see why he wasn't participating, he seemed to be disapproving of something. Chaotic and #hashtag and $@*. What? She frowned. Ram turned to her with a questioning voice. The last word you said. #hashtag and $@*. I don't understand it. Is it ancient Velofi or Dwemery? She asked. Ram seemed unresponsive to her questions or unable to answer. She couldn't figure out which of the two, as he had no expressions to read on his robotic face and his body language was non-existent. Seriously, just how did John figure out information about you? Lonoth asked in a frustrated tone as she wasn't able to crack the puzzle that is Ram in front of her. As the fight was over and the two fighting combatants returned to normal, the party proceeded smoothly until they reached a chamber that had a lot of valves, levers, and some control crystals. It took Lonoth fairly 2 hours to see which goes where until she could boot up the facility once again. But once that happened, a crisis struck as the room was suddenly invaded by black smoke and intense heat. The four immediately started running all the way up to the safety of the outside surface. The ventral terminus was now functional according to Lonoth's analysis, and she used a telepathic spell to contact John and tell him that everything worked out. He had a rough idea of their success, since he was watching the large chimneys of the Vale of Tears as they started to release black smoke everywhere. Now that those pillars of smoke were visible to the brass fortress, it meant that a strong force of mechanical abominations was on its way. They will come to investigate the Vale of Tears first, then they will rush to the ventral terminus to shut it down. Here's where John comes to play. Homen, they are closing. As John was tinkering with his biggest toy so far, a black cat jumped on his back and walked up to his head as he was bending down while working. Yes, I've been ready for this for some time now, John said with a maniac's smile. You sure you won't hit the other people? The black cat asked. Nefertiti, my darling, do I look like an amateur? He asked the cat as he stood up and carried her in his arms. Other than magic and food, you make every other thing explode these days, she said. Oh, someone's a bit cranky. John laughed while messing up her fur as she started to bite him in response. That's how things work, dearie. They either be eaten, be cast like magic, or be gone with a boom. John pointed at his latest creation and waited for it to boom, but it didn't boom. I said boom. John shouted with the same level of enthusiasm. Voice command activated. Boom sequence initiated. As the machine started speaking in a mechanical voice, John's grin became wider and wider. Kitty cat, it is time. You really have to do this? Nefertiti asked in a moment of hesitation. We can't use magic, remember? Bombardment is our next best option. John gazed at his creation with marvel, and looked at many other replicas that he was working on in this pile of junk. They all had one of two shapes, either a big tube or a large box. At this moment, only John knew what these things do. I have gathered the best toys I could from Sotha Sil's vault and remodeled them to my heart's content. The face Messner will be making is going to be priceless. John said and laughed with a sick grin. As for now, we should start taking over the Vale of Tears. John started lining all the large tube-like objects together and personally climbed into one of them along with his trusty rifle and his trusty kitty cat. Are they there yet? John asked. They are starting to swarm the place, Nefertiti replied. Then we must go. Fire the guns. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Boom. Whoa-ho! And from all the mortar cannons John was working on the last few days, he was fired alongside many makeshift mortar shells towards the Vale of Tears, where Messner's abomination force was located. He aimed to destroy Messner's response force and get to the power grid that reached that location. Away from John and his maniac bombarding, Glymet and the rest were watching over the facility known as the Halls of Regulation just south to the Mire Mechanica swamps and the Brass Fortress. Unlike the Ventral Terminus, the Halls of Regulation are much larger and were actively guarded by factotums and fabricants. While the factotums are the mechanical guardians of Clockwork City, the fabricants are its fauna of animals and beasts. They are part mechanical and part animal, but unlike Messner's abominations, the fabricants are almost identical to normal animals that have some prosthetic limbs and exoskeletons attached to them. In some sense, the difference between a clockwork fabricant and a clockwork abomination is much like the difference between a normal animal and a patchwork chimera. So these are the creatures of Sotha Sil. Glymet spoke in wonder. I see there is a sense to them that I find it brilliant. At least there is one thing in this dumb that is half decent. Lonoth replied, Then again, I have never expected in my life to say that about Clockwork City, but I hate it here. You do? Glymet asked. Green meadows, snowy peaks, ashlands, that's my thing. Not this. Lonoth replied with a lot of complaining in her tone. Glymet was surprised that Lonoth hated this place which he finds, despite all its junk and oily smell, very fascinating. While the two of them wouldn't disagree on a lot of things, Glymet wanted to express that he is fond of this alien realm, but not before Ram and Coda approach them. Reconnaissance complete. Ram spoke the wholest sentence he said for the day. How many are there? Lonoth asked. Aluminculi outside 12. Inside none. Ram replied. But that question seemed to have rubbed Coda the wrong way. It is no secret that the factotums have been one of Sotha Sil's most wondrous creations, but the Halls of Regulations has its own automated system and mounted turrets that can muster a defense heavier than that of the Brass Fortress itself, blah blah blah. Known as the lifeline of the entire Clockwork City, this facility was established to last despite its current quietness, blah blah blah. 1,000 years ago, during the events when the Unholy Alliance tried to invade our most sacred city, the saboteurs of the three Daedric devils, who defied the Called Harbor Compact of Lord Sotha Sil, had made an attempt to destroy these halls, but in an act of awe-inspiring might, the defenders of the Halls of Regulation mounted a serious defense as they killed 1,000 attackers in a single minute, blah blah blah. Tread carefully, friends, for the road ahead is full of danger and death. Wow! Aha! Both Glymet and Lonoth looked at Coda with conflicted feelings. This thing almost killed my head from inside. Glymet held his head and backed off. He is amazing. To know such history about the events of the attack on this city after the Called Harbor Compact. Lonoth, on the other hand, was looking for her notes to write what Coda just said. Coda was a mystery that even rivaled Ram, the possible last child of one of two lost elven civilizations. Coda had many personality shifts depending on his situation. The normal Coda is a shy and naive childish young man, Coda. The others were a cranky and grumpy silent tinkerer who would appear whenever Coda starts working on something that depends on his tinkering skill, Smed. Another was a prankster with good awareness and survival skills, Juan. Another was the talkative historian from just now, Spamton. And the most recent of them all the oversized berserking behemoth, Dragon. According to John, there was a female version of Coda when he started playing with Nefertiti, but that hasn't come out yet. Coda is a D&D Kobold PC from a campaign I'd met. It is safe to say that the player that is sponsoring him here has done some awesome role-playing during that campaign and would change personalities depending on what skill he is rolling. Despite the nonsense he spat just now, he was right about one thing. The Halls of Regulation has a ton of automated defense even when it is deactivated and its functions relocated to the city. If they were to attack it now and reawaken its power, they had to go in strong and not get overwhelmed. But just as they were thinking of a plan, a booming sound started to echo in the air. Boom boom asterisk bobo biabom. Star. The sound came from the direction they came from just a few minutes ago, from the Vale of Tears direction. Is that John? Glymet asked. He said he wouldn't go outside the hideout since he shouldn't use magic, Lonoth said. The two of them turned towards Ram and Coda. The two of them seemed to be knowing something, but rather than Coda's big-mouthed persona, Ram seemed to be the one more aware of what was happening. Buying time, he said. Just as he said that, the patrols of factotums outside the Halls of Regulation started to redirect their route towards the nearby ruckus coming from the Vale of Tears. They are going for him, Lonoth said, but will he use magic and risk allowing Messner to track him? I am not sure, Glymet replied and turned to the other two. You two, there is something you are not telling us. Stuck with the two worst speakers on the Clockwork City, Glymet and Lonoth seemed to be figuring something out and pressed with their gazes. He is not using magic because he shouldn't, the meek Coda replied. He hasn't been able to do so since he arrived here. Since he arrived, John Dare, the infamous arch-wizard of northern Skyrim, is unable to use magic. This is news to them just now and quite frankly something scary. We should hurry back. Lonoth stood and faced the direction of the Vale of Tears in a rush. Wait! But Glymet held her arm to stop her. Let go, Glym. We need to go. Stop it, Glymet said. Don't you see what he is doing? Also, if half the stories I heard about him are true, he will be okay. But that's dangerous. Lonoth had a worried look as she looked at the Vale. He seems to have a plan, Glymet said. If we hurry up and activate the halls, all those automated factotums would cease functioning. And the halls are closer than him right now. Lonoth calmed down and seemed to have realized the situation. I can't face Lady Nurina if something were to happen to him, she said, and immediately started leading the way towards the lightly defended halls of regulations. As for John, who just landed in the Vale of Tears with a boom, he was ready to face something that may be his worst match ever. John's own shadow. Chapter 681, Clockwork Trap. Chapter 681, Clockwork Trap. Things didn't seem to have gone as planned, but where John landed was one messy place. Fire was raining down all around him, and he was disoriented from the sudden impact. Nefertiti, answer me. He called and looked around, but as he looked up, he saw something falling down towards him, and with a strong burst of power, he ran away from its impact zone. Things didn't go as planned at all, and he put himself in a messy situation. If not for his strength, Any normal person would have gone through one hell of an experience just landing like that. The place around him was large and wide, akin to a cave system with a sea of lava covering its floor. Only some rock spires stood tall with traces of construction work at the sides of the cave. Messenger, fuck. John couldn't believe what happened just now. It was all going according to plan, until it wasn't. Messenger has managed to remotely activate the Barlizer's mazed band and take them all to Clockwork City. A week earlier to the arrival of Glymet and Lonoth. John arrived at Clockwork City, but in a place where he had no idea which goes where. It was something akin to a huge cave with a deep pit of lava without any exit or escape. The perfect trap if there was any. Using the Eye of Magicka spell, John tried to scout the space around him, but the Magicka was being siphoned off this space, as if there was something wrong with the very core of the world. Messenger must have done something during their transfer to Clockwork City, and made it so that John ends up here. What a cunning bastard! If John were to remain in this place for more than what he should, he would be worn out eventually and Messenger would come to pick on him easily. That, of course, if he doesn't find an escape as soon as possible. Preserving his Magicka, John started to channel his inner energy and squatted on the rock spire he was on. With an incredible display of physical strength, John's leg muscles started to bulge up insanely as they tore through his pants, and with an insane shockwave, John jumped from the rock spire he was on to the closest. The distance was around 100 meters between the two spires, and John's jump almost fell short at the mark of 80 meters. For that, he curled his body and cast a novice spell, Air Bounce. Just like the spell's name, John bounced like a ball in the air, and his jump was extended for a long enough distance to land safely on the spire. He could have cast levitation and spared himself and his pants, but some gut feeling told him to be very careful on how to handle his Magicka, since his Magicka regeneration was practically not functioning in this environment. After repeating the process a few times, John was able to reach the wall of the cave at the construction area he spotted earlier. Where he landed was a metal platform that had a pedestal in its center, and it was made of many cogs and machinery, something that John couldn't understand from an initial look. However, this thing confirmed to him that he is in Clockwork City. It all looked like a Dwemer ruin around him, but it gave a very different vibe. Just how? As John asked that question, his answer came almost instantly. Ho ho! Look at that place! A voice spoke with a cheerful glee. John looked around, but the voice came from everywhere around him. He narrowed his eyes and focused his aura to try and pinpoint the speaker. Don't waste your energy, I am speaking through the sound system of the pneumatic forge. The voice commented on John's reaction. Messenger. John spoke with obvious anger. Yes, John Dare, Dragonborn. Messenger replied in a vicious mocking tone. I warned you to stay away and you didn't listen. Don't think you'll survive this. John spoke. Oh, come on. Worry about yourself. Messenger replied. I've done extensive research about you and I've got to say, I am a big fan of you and your master, Lady Nurina. Moreover, you are a disciple from the student line of Divaith Fyr. Your grandmaster and my master were comrades, you know. Divaith Fyr and Sotha Sil. So you're the disciple of Set? Humph, I guessed as much. Set is short for Sotha Sil, don't ask me why. The last disciple of Set. Messenger corrected John. While my master and I had a complicated relationship, I was the sole survivor of Almalexia Onslaught when she killed my master and all the other disciples. Almost all. I think I may find survivors now that I am back. All right, introductions over. Get your ass over here so I can start kicking. John said. Oh, you weren't listening, John Dare. Messenger said and made a creepy laugh. I told you that in Skyrim, I was in your realm, the world was fighting alongside you, I wasn't your match. So, here is where things get a tiny bit complicated, my friend. You, a Dragonborn, are a hero who is yet to fulfill his fate. I can't kill you and risk the world's retaliation yet. Aha! However, once I reach a position equal or higher than yours as a hero, you and I are going to have a different conversation than this friendly banter. Well, you have some good brain on that head of yours after all, John said, just one teeny tiny problem. You can't keep me here until you do what you're about to do. True. Messner seemed to agree, however. I can keep you busy for as long as I want. Remember what I told you, John? Skyrim is your playground, but Clockwork City, that's mine. Oh ho! So what are you gonna do? John asked with a challenging grin. That is the first time you disappoint me, John Dare. Messner said in a voice devoid of emotions. This is the Pneumatic Forge. The Pneumatic Forge? The name doesn't ring a bell? Nope. Well, maybe Divaith Fyr didn't want this secret to be known to anyone, I guess. Messner contemplated audibly. Well, let me spoil his secret then. This Pneumatic Forge is the place where your dear Grandmaster almost lost his life to the Daedric Prince Nocturnal. Nonsense. John snorted. Even the Daedric princes tremble on the mention of Divaith Fyr's name. True. Messner nodded. Everyone has their own ups and downs though. So, have you ever heard about the glyph of Magia Memoria? Messner asked a question that left John frowning. That frown, however, lasted a second before John decided to immediately clad himself with the best magical protection he could muster. However, too late. The glyph of Magia Memoria is a magical glyph used to investigate any magic that was cast in a certain location by diving through the fabric of time and space to recreate effects similar to the one that was just cast. It has many requirements such as knowing which spell to look for, knowing the exact time and place it was cast in, etc. Still, these requirements were as easy as a breeze for an archwizard such as Messner. I didn't go through all this trouble to redirect your arrival's route just for you to be delayed for a few hours. Messner kept laughing as he watched the spell surround John. John felt it, the magic cast through the shadows, the spell that got a grip of him. He felt that something was growing around him and in panic, he punched that shadowy figure. Back off! He shouted with a burst of physical power reinforced with his draining aura. As his hit landed on whatever that is, John felt so torn all of a sudden and looked to see that a shadow was separating from his own. Just as that shadow landed not too far from him, John realized what he just lost. No! John said, my magic! The shadow was John's entire magic casting ability, an aspect of his Inuic form that was torn from him by arcane means. This spell was once cast on Divaith Fyr by Daedric Prince Nocturnal, but John only knew that from Messner just now. Get over here! John immediately bolted towards his shadow, but the thing reflexively evaded him, and cast a zap spell on John, moving him backward by a few meters. The shadow then decided to start running towards the exit it saw. Shit! As John saw his shadow escape like that, he tried to keep up, but he wasn't as fast as a shadow. Ha ha ha! Messner kept laughing during that brief exchange. Try to keep up then. I am sure it won't take you long, John Dare. Fucker! John shouted, and his voice started to break through the metal around him just by his raging Thursdayum. He kept running, and the traps of the Pneumatic Forge kept activating behind him as he avoided them all like a pro athlete. In the end, he managed to break out of the Pneumatic Forge to the site of the ruined Clockwork realm, and it was when he lost track of his shadow. The event when Divaith Fyr got his shadow separated from him happened in the first mission of the Clockwork City DLC in the Elder Scrolls Online. Back to the present. Just like how he landed once he arrived in Clockwork City, John landed towards the Vale of Tears in a barrage of mortar shells that he personally crafted for this event. Would na KSD. Before he lands with the bombardment alongside the shell he loaded himself into, John uses the whirlwind sprint to escape the fall by stepping on one of the shells and whirlwinding away. The place where the shells landed was the Vale of Tears, where Messener's response force of the chimera-like fabricants, known as the Abominations, have gathered. Hell was let loose upon the monsters that were in the area, and the pillars of smoke became one large cloud of dust, smoke, and explosions. John's mortar strike was just as splendid as it was lethal, and he crash-landed not too far off the bombing site. Just like that, he remained there watching what he had done and waiting for the results to clear up. Unlike when Divaith Fyr was projected to the separation of his shadow and was greatly weakened, John is way younger than Fyr and didn't rely on magic to keep himself alive. Even more, John is both a fighter and a wizard, and his martial ability was on par with his magical ability. Moreover, he still had his Thursdayum, which is a part of him more than anything else. His magic may come useless and his body may fail him, but his voice will always be strong and dominating. But John loved his magic, and through it, he can do his greatest tricks with ease. That was the reason for this bombing. To begin with, this was why he had to draw out Mycenar's response force. As the dust cloud cleared and the fire eating away the place started to settle down a bit, a sphere of magicka could be seen in the center of the bombing site. There at its center was Messener's core power of his response force. John's shadow. It wasn't the first time John tried to retrieve his shadow by drawing out the response force, but this time, John managed to isolate his shadow by annihilating all the abomination it was using as a shield against John's martial prowess. "You know what your problem is?" John spoke to the shadow. "Every day, every night, every waking moment of my being, I grow stronger. I trained both my body and my magic to stand on par with one another. But you, my shadow, my magic, you haven't had any training for a week, while my body had double the juice." John smiled with a wider grin than ever before. "Every day I grow stronger. I am stronger than I was 1 second ago. Do you think you, the 1 week ago version of me, can match me now?" John just wanted to give this cheesy speech, even though his shadow can't respond, and right now, he was going to do some heavy hitting in order to get his magic back. After a few hours of John's encounter with his shadow, Glymet and the team managed to crawl out of the Hall of Regulations with no injuries and unexpected gain. They even managed to rescue a member of the Tarnished that survived the massacre that happened to Coda's people who lived outside the Brass Fortress. According to that survivor, there is a secret tunnel not too far from the Halls of Regulation that can lead inside the fortress past its defenses. Hearing that, Glymet and Lonoth insisted on going in despite Coda's frantic protest. If this was to work, they can rescue Swims at night without resorting to John's mad plan of going to war against the entire Brass Fortress. Chapter 682, Clockwork Apostles. Chapter 682. Clockwork Apostles. So, this leads into the city? Glymet. Into the fortress. Tarnished Boss Mare. Yeah, the fortress city. Glymet. It is just the fortress. Tarnished Boss Mare. Wow, this is a city, right? Glymet. It is, but it is a fortress. Tarnished Boss Mare. That doesn't make any sense. Glymet. This realm is the Clockwork City. The settlement is called the Brass Fortress. Tarnished Boss Mare. That's confusing. Why not just call it the Clockwork Realm and the Brass City? Glymet. I don't know. Tarnished Boss Mare. Glymet, stop confusing everyone. Lonoth shouted at the 2 men whose conversation was starting to irritate her. And you, if your route leads us somewhere filled with abominations, things won't look good for you. Yes, lady. I swear on Set's name. The Tarnished Boss Mare was a member of one of Clockwork City's factions, the Nomadic Tarnished, a group of those who lack the skills required to become a Clockwork Apostle or are incapable of being merchants or craftsmen. As a result, they are cast out from the main settlement and the major facilities. Coda was also a tarnished, but judging by the fact that neither Coda nor the Bossmare survivor recognized one another, it was easy to understand that the tarnished people were split into many groups and clans. Either way, the Bossmare man offered a way into the brass fortress, and the group had to make a careful decision between this possible infiltration and John's angry plan of blasting everything that's moving. Seeing how John was already bombarding the response force Messner was sending and the fact that he did that even without magic, they knew that he would go to radical lengths in order to attain his goals. The problem which he seemed to not care about was the fact that swims at night may actually get caught in the crossfire, and that's against the whole purpose they have ventured here for. With this set mentality, the team decided to head towards the brass fortress, but Coda lagged behind and decided to return to John and inform him about their change of plans. As for Ram, he seemed to be willing to explore the fortress with them. It didn't take them long to arrive at an old tunnel that was transporting fresh air to the brass fortress from the halls of regulation. The tunnel had strong blasts of air current after it was dormant for the past 2 centuries, thanks to activating the halls of regulations, and the group had a rough journey through the tunnels all the way to the mechanical spires inside the brass fortress. As they managed to evade the rotors in the tunnel and exit it via a maintenance hatch, they found themselves on top of a vast city, vaster and wider than any city they've ever come across on Tamriel. The jewel of the brass badland, the brass fortress, the tarnished Bossmare said with pride despite not being a resident of the city. Gods! A city made of metal and glass, Loneth exclaimed. The legends don't give it any justice. Yes. The Bossmare nodded. You can consider yourself the first unlawful trespassers of the city since the fall of Lord Set. Its beauty can only be equaled by its arrogance. But just as the 4 of them started wondering about the appearance of this city of brass, a pillar of smoke was spotted rising from the eastern section of the city. I guess we are not the first trespassers after all, Glymet said. I don't think that's John Dare. We need to get down there, Loneth said, and instead of taking the maintenance ladder on the spire, she cast Feather Fall on herself and jumped off the spire. I am coming too. Glymet did the same and descended after her. The only ones that remained on the spire were the tarnished Bossmare and Ram, who were transforming the mechanical body. Jet thrusters infusion installed. Ram spoke in an emotionless mechanical voice and started to levitate with a flame coming from tubes under his feet. Ah! The tarnished Bossmare looked at how the others were moving around and back off from Ram. I'll be waiting here then. But before he would do anything, Ram held the Bossmare from his collar and lifted him up as the man started screaming during the flight down. Once the group reached the source of the smoke, they were shocked by the fact that the things that were burning were actually some of Messner's abominations. There were no citizens or any living souls in the place they are in right now, which is a market square. What is happening here? Asked Glymet as he checked out the objects that were scattered on the ground. There was a lot of clutter and destruction, but what stood out was some weapons and blood splatters on the ground. Glymet crouched down to check out an item, which resembled the weapon that was being used by John, and frowned in his thoughts. As for the others, they were looking around and taking note of the place that seemed to have a lot of food stalls and strange mechanical contraptions. While Loneth was focused on the machines, Ram was drawn to a certain screen that was viewing some visual illusions of scandalously dressed ladies with mechanical body implants. Ram was somehow mystified by the feeling he was experiencing, but just as he was about to interact with the holographic illusion, Loneth was there for the rescue. She swung her staff and destroyed the machines that were emitting this scandalous and improper view. By Azura, what are these deviants making a child look at? Loneth said with an angry tone. Ram, if you see anything like that, look the other way immediately. While a bit disappointed, Ram lowered his head and complied with what Loneth said. It was obvious that these illusions had stirred up something in him, but he was too confused to process what it was. But just at that moment of noise when Lonoth destroyed the hologram emitter, those who were adept in battle within this group, Lonoth and Glymet, started to back off while warning Ram and the tarnished bossmare to back off too. The group retreated until they were all back to back as they sensed something they couldn't make heads or tails of. At that moment, and accompanied by the sound of magical machinery, many brass-armored figures started to appear from all around the market square while surrounding the group of adventurers. They were all humans, elves, beastfolk, living breathing mortals. "Is that, by Azura, it is!" Lonoth exclaimed. "After all these centuries, there are still people down there. They must be the last of Sotha Sil's worshippers. Careful, I think they..." At the lead of the staff-wielding band of Clockwork Apostles was a Dunmare wielding a large staff that reflected his leadership status. Just as sudden as he emerged with his people, he gave them the attack command. "More Outlanders, friends! Defend the city!" The man shouted, and all the people who emerged from the market square aimed their staves at the group of adventurers before sending a hail of spells and projectiles at them. "Wait. Let's talk." Lonoth seemed to be willing to drop her staff and talk peace, but the agitated crowd was far from being peaceful, and her words fell on deaf ears. Thanks to Glymet's fast reaction, he managed to pull her into cover and proceeded to retaliate immediately. As Glymet and Lonoth hid behind a stall, Ram and the tarnished bossmare retreated into a hidden alley among the buildings. If Ram was to join this fight, his only weapon, the Gatling cannon, wouldn't be enough to convince those people of talking peace. That's why it was all left for Glymet and Lonoth. Glymet jumped out of cover and vaulted at the nearest Clockwork Apostle before tackling and hitting him with the pommel of his sword. He evasively avoided all the attacks that were launched at him and arrived at where the Apostle's leader was positioned, which happened to be a high wooden scaffolding. Glymet only needed to kick the scaffolding for it to crumble and the man on top to fall with it. Lonoth made sure to defend herself and Glymet during that process while disturbing the spells cast at her and stopping anyone from doing anything too dangerous until Glymet got the leader of the Clockwork Apostles and held him at a sword point. "All right, that's enough," she shouted, and all the people present in the market square could see what had become of their leader. As it was intimidating and frightful, Lonoth chose to take the peaceful approach. "All right, Glym. That's enough for you as well." Glymet nodded and retreated his sword away from the man's face before offering him a hand to stand. The Clockwork Apostles and the people of the city were all on edge and realized that their foes were surely powerful, but Lonoth's next words were more assuring to them. "We came in peace," she said, and walked to Glymet's side, facing the leader of the Apostles. The man seemed in pain as he held his back with his mechanical arm. Actually, everyone in this place seemed to have replaced their arms with mechanical ones, some even replaced their legs, eyes, parts of their faces, and even had their torsos and chests filled with mechanical implants. Those were the real people of Clockwork City, the Apostles of Sotha Sil. We thought you were with the other Outlanders. You really aren't, are you?" the man asked. "We are not," Lonoth replied. "My name is Lonoth and this is my companion Glymet. It is rather unexpected for us to end up in your realm, but we came here looking for another companion of ours, and those people who attacked you, Messner and his men, have taken him as a prisoner." "So it was Messner after all these years," the man sighed in grief. "My name is Galen. I'd welcome you, but as you can see, we are struggling against the invaders all alone." "Invaders!" Messner, his lieutenants, those Outlanders. They were hunting our population for Messner to experiment and transform them. The Apostles and I are holding this square as a defense chokepoint," Galen said. "Those Outlanders, they are treasure hunters. Maybe they have our friend." "Which way did they go?" Lonoth asked. "They headed towards the Mire Mechanica, and yes, they had a prisoner with them that was also an Outlander," Galen said so, which made both Glymet and Lonoth hopeful that their friend is alive. But please, they've also taken something important from us. Galen said, the memory crystal of Sotha Sil, his last memory crystal. We hope you retrieve it for us. It is our most sacred holy relic. Lonoth frowned, since she had found some memory crystals as well in the halls of regulation and the ventral terminus. She was going to show them to John so they can research them together at a later date, but if these memory crystals belonged to Sotha Sil, it would be very important to acquire them. All right. She nodded. We will come back for sure, but we'd need your guidance to the Mire Mechanica. A safe passage from point A to B. That can be arranged. Galen nodded. We will surely return, since our way out of this realm is through this city, but let me ask you first, when we return, what can we expect from Messenger? She asked. Messenger, that bastard. Galen seemed to be more vexed every time that name was mentioned. He was once an apostle like us, but he walked a very different path, which led to his excommunication by Lord Set not too long before he passed. Messenger is obsessed with surpassing Sotha Sil, so he will create the most bizarre things by combining machines and flesh. Look who's talking. Glymet spoke in a muffled tone as he stared at the apostle's mechanic implant. So, Lonoth raised her voice to cover Glymet's. After we get your artifact and our friend, do you know a way out of the Clockwork City back to Nirn? The Brass Fortress Way Shrine. But that thing hasn't worked for years, and a few hours ago, there was a power outage in the entire city, so we need to fix them one problem at a time. Galen replied. And of course, Messenger as well, Lonoth said. That too. Galen nodded meekly, since he was asking them to take care of the arch-wizard that decimated everything in his way to get into the city. Lonoth and Glymet had agreed on retrieving Swims at night and escaping peacefully if possible, but things seemed to be progressing the way John had anticipated. Going head-to-head against Messenger was always on the table, but now, it has become inevitable. On their way to the Mire Mechanica, Lonoth and Glymet informed John of their little side venture, and he seemed pleased to hear that there are clockwork apostles still living in the city. Still, he informed Lonoth that he has amassed enough power and will be striking the city in 6 hours. He advised them to get Swims at night during that time window and join him before then, since he needs 5 lieutenants to invade the city. By that time, the last thing anyone could expect was that by regaining his power, John had managed to assemble a small army of machines outside the fortress. Chapter 683 Clockwork Stars. Chapter 683 Clockwork Stars. After meeting Apostle Galen and the remaining clockwork apostles, the group headed outside the brass fortress through the secret tunnels. Glymet didn't seem to be willing to expose John's attack plan to the clockwork apostles in the city, but Lonoth was too excited and revealed that reinforcements are waiting outside the city in order to take Messenger out. With the same level of excitement, the clockwork apostles were very welcoming to the idea of taking on Messenger and meeting those visitors from the outside world for the first time in 2 centuries. Of course, not all of the apostles were feeling the same, and some were fearing an invasion from more outlanders. Some said they would handle it on their own, and others seemed to be willing to take up arms against any more invading forces, but Galen, their leader, was adamant about receiving reinforcements. He said that whatever Messenger is doing deep in the fortress may be disastrous if left alone more than this. Also, it seemed very obvious that Messenger was afraid of whatever was out there and was sending a lot of his twisted creations to fight it and keep it in check. Galen seemed to know what Messenger was after, but kept feigning ignorance no matter how many times Lonoth asked. However, Glymet took note of that. In the end, the party of Glymet, Lonoth, Ram, and their tarnished guide ended up in the Mire Mechanica and started searching for the treasure hunters that were hired by Messenger, the ones who still had Swims at night as their prisoner. The Mire Mechanica was a place of brass-colored land and deep pits of murky waters that were interconnected through old water pipe. This swampland seemed to have formed thanks to the leakage of some water pipes and its lack of maintenance, which slowly became contaminated with all sorts of diseases thanks to the microorganisms that started inhabiting these parts. Moreover, many other liquids were leaking in the swamps, which included refined and crude oil from the surrounding broken oil rig. Many alien trees grew in these arid swamplands, and some were even growing through and around the brass pipes that were everywhere in this part of the land. As for finding the treasure hunters, it was like a stroke of luck when Ram was sending some feedback signals to the workshop at the Pavilion of Artifice where John was and happened to pick up a nearby signal that was being transmitted to somewhere inside the city. When Ram informed Lonath of that, she led the four of them to intercept whatever was emitting it. There, they found the treasure hunters. From how things seemed like, 4 treasure hunters were surrounding a pit that was being dug by someone, and they were all armed with advanced weaponry from Clockwork City. Glymet could tell that the one who was digging the pit for the treasure hunters was Swims at night, as they seemed to be forcing them to dig out something in the murky swampland. As for getting Swims out of this situation without endangering him, Glymet had a very simple plan. "Hey!" Glymet called as he walked towards the treasure hunters. "The 4 of you. That's my friend you have there." As anger and hostility were displayed on his face, the treasure hunters aimed their weapons at him with menacing glares and obvious smirks. "Well, well, well. If it isn't the fool we got the ring from." The leader of the treasure hunters, the blondie called Aldora, spoke as she pointed with her sword at Swims. "Came for your friend. Swims." Lonath came out from hiding, while taking some distance from Glymet. Lonath? Peeking his head from the pit, Swims couldn't believe his eyes, for the face he just saw was that of one of his oldest friends. This, however, seemed to have irritated the treasure hunters, as they weren't expecting more nuisance. "Hey, I'd hate to get in the way of your reunion with your mate, but how about this?" Aldora spoke and got behind the pit where Swims was. "Throw down your weapons and promise to leave us to plunder in peace, and you can have him." "Don't do it, Glym," Swims called, but Aldora kicked a stone against him to shut him up. "You want us to trust you? Not likely. We'll get him back the hard way." Lonath seemed fire up and her staff started to radiate with flame. "Wait, Lonath." Glymet, however, seemed more concerned about Swims and took off his sheathed sword from his belt and started to lower it down. "We're just here for our friend." "Wise choice," Aldora replied, and her smile curled upwards even more. "Although, it just occurred to me, why don't we just kill you now and keep our captive?" "Yes, you can very much do that, or," Glymet said with an expressionless face, and then looked at Swims, "you can lower your head." Both Lonath and Glymet ducked to the ground immediately, and the sound of Gatling thunder broke through the calmness of the swamp forest as a hail of bullets made a brrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr left to right, the bullets decimated the heavily armored treasure hunter at the forefront of the group and blasted off the right arm of the Khajiit archer right next to him. The orc shamaness that was behind them transformed herself into a small creature and escaped immediately, while the Nord Aldora ducked to the ground almost the same instant Glymet and Lonath did. As the hail of bullets was over, Swims at Night attacked Aldora with his shovel, but she rolled away and started running towards where her orc friend did. She looked back at Glymet, who was chasing her, and shouted in rage as she watched her Khajiit comrade bleed to death. Glymet didn't chase Aldora for long and ran back to Swims and Lonath. He saw Lonath trying to pull Swims out of the pit, and so he too gave a helping hand. Swims, thank Azra you're safe. As they sat together in the swamp, Lonath and Swims started catching their breath from the tension of the situation while Glymet stood over them. What was that? Swims asked with a shocked Argonian expression. That insane attack. It almost blew my head off. Survival estimation 95%. A voice replied. Mechanical and emotionless, the owner of the voice stepped out from the cover of dried and charred bushes in his full brass body. Ram seemed to have switched his legs for caterpillar tracks, like a military tank. To withstand the power of the Gatling gun, he just sprayed around. Seeing him, the Argonian Swims at Night had to stand alarmed. "Relax, it is a friend we met here. Call him Ram," Lonoth said. "Seriously? Those things run errands for that crazy Messenger wizard. Can't believe you tamed one," said Swims as he checked out Ram from a distance. "He's not a factotum. He's a real person trapped in one. If only he can tell us how, though." Glymet said, "John Dare introduced us to him." "Right." Swims became alert immediately as if he remembered something dangerous. "John Dare, he's here. We've met him," Lonoth said and stood up. "We need to reunite with him later, but we agreed to help the Clockwork Apostles with their memory crystal that was stolen by the treasure hunters. Now that they've run." Lonoth seemed a little bit depressed and Glymet shook his shoulder, since he's not going to chase some dangerous individuals like those treasure hunters into an unknown plane of existence like this. "Oh, you mean this?" At that moment, Swims at Night forked out something from his pocket. That's, both Glymet and Lonoth were lost for words seeing the prize they agreed to collect for Galen and the Apostles in the hands of their sticky-fingered friend. "How did you get that?" Lonoth asked. "It looked valuable, so I swept it from those idiots," he said with the sinister laugh of a thief. "You're a wonder, Swims." Lonoth hugged Swims at Night and looked at the memory crystal with glee. "Let's move from this place first. We need to take a look at its content." And just as she was about to drag her allies and move towards the city, something came flying over their heads. The three adventurers lowered their heads and put on their defense while Ram aimed up his Gatling gun and sprayed a hail of bullets at whatever that thing was with extreme prejudice and unshakable accuracy. That flying thing landed on a tree by getting impaled into one of its branches. As it stopped, it appeared that the flying thing was a headless body that somehow got flung by some extremely powerful attack. As for the head, it seemed to have fallen in a different location long before the body got sprayed with Ram's bullet. This body belonged to the orc shamaness that was with the treasure hunters and escaped first just a couple of minutes ago. As for what came next, all those who were present felt the sound of footsteps slowly approaching them. "Ram, get ready," Glymet spoke. "Disapproved." Ram replied with no interest whatsoever. "What?" The others felt anxious as whatever was coming with nothing less than an imminent threat. As the footsteps got closer, two figures emerged from behind the dry trees. The first was Coda in his gigantic form called Dragon, and the other was none other than John Dare, who was wearing armor this time around and dragging the blonde Aldora from her hair. "Glymet, old man," John called while waving his free hand that had some smoke coming from it, for some reason. "Slaughter! Ha!" Coda, Dragon, burst into maniacal laughter and started beating down the corpse of the armored treasure hunters with his oversized arm. "Thunder Cookie! Again! Again! Ha! Hey, P-Brain! Only I can do Thunder Cookie!" John shouted at Coda, Dragon. "Only you." Coda, Dragon, tilted his head in wonder before realizing the truth. "Sag." The others realized that John's iconic Thunder Cookie spell was the method used to blast the orc shamaness to death. The lethality of that spell was rumored to be able to make opponents explode on contact and was used frequently by John, especially against the people he hated the most, namely the Thalmor agents. While the others recalled that, John ignored Coda, Dragon, whose depression shrunk him back to the normal Coda, and approached Glymet. "You made contact with living Clockwork Apostles and found a memory crystal of Sotha's Sill," said John to Lonoth and Glymet. "I can only say this day is getting better and better. You seem to have recovered your lost power." Lonoth said, "You've had me worried, you know." "Sorry, Ms. Lonoth, just don't rat me out to Mom," John said with a sleazy smile. "So, can we take a look at the crystal? Do you have a method to crack it?" Glymet asked. "Well, now that I have recovered my magic, I can retrieve all my toys from my magical storage. I've all sorts of toys stashed over there," John said while showing off his armor, then continued, "Also, don't you want to hear about my war plan?" "A war? You really want to go that far?" Glymet asked with morbid expressions, seeing that John had filled the pavilion of artifice with various machinery. "A battle is the right term, old man," John replied. "Messner has an army and I can't practice necromancy or conjuration easily in Clockwork City since I am not quite sure about the outer plane motions from this plane of existence. Even the magicka in this place is kinda weird. Clockwork City has always been reported as a place with abnormal magicka, but that can be said about all planes of existence." Lonoth agreed. Indeed. Even if Sotha Sil was aiming to create a world better than Mundus in his own words, he made limitations and restricted many freedoms over the magicka of his realm. During my visits to various Oblivion realms, I noticed that many types of magic were restricted by the will of the lords of these realms, as the mortal plane of Mundus remains the realm with the most independent magicka. John overanalyzed the subject with Lonoth as colleagues. The vision of Lorcan when he created Mundus was indeed extraordinary and counted on granting all living beings their freedom of choice. I guess we are still learning about the truth of the wheel and the tower even to this day. Lonoth agreed with him, making the rest of the group feel stupid, and Glymet to be barely keeping up. But let's not forget that the dawn magic has been restricted to Mundus over the years. Can this be some sort of restriction made by Shor Lorcan? John speculated. I still take the stand that the dawn magic was the key of creation and we, the mortal races, are unable to access it due to our mortal limitation. What can be called dawn magic can actually be something far above our regular ability to cast magic, such as spells of higher tiers. Lonoth explained her opinion. Forbidden magic? John made an understanding face. Precisely. A magic that can redo and undo reality is of a scale such as. Alright, that's enough. Swims cried in both Lonoth and John. Look at how dizzy everyone is, you goddamn nerds. Oh, sorry. John and Lonoth retreated from their research ideas and returned to the topic at hand. So, the war efforts that I made, John stood from the circle around the fire and pointed at all the large boxes he gathered. Ladies, I present to you a pneumatic forge assembly line. Nobody clapped. John had to clear his throat and say the word again, but only Coda shifted his personality to Smeed and started praising John for collecting all this junk and tinkering it into something that looks useful. Emotionally damaged by the underwhelming praise, John started to explain his plan. So the pneumatic forge is the place where Sotha Sil created his combat factotums. I ripped off some machines from over there that can help us recycle the junk all around this junkyard and transform it into combat factotums, John said with dampened spirit, and his speech pace increased while his eyes were turning hollow. It's all wired up to the power transformer into the Veil of Tears, which I had to bombard earlier this morning in order to mask my attack as an attempt to fight against Messner, while in fact, I was wiring these contraptions to the power grid in order to create an army of machines that can help us fight the army of abominations that is being assembled by Messner as we speak and coming to rip us all apart. Alright, calm down, Glymet said with a sympathetic face. We were just messing with you. Of course we know what all this pneumatic forge. Pneumatic forge. Lonoth corrected him. That, yet don't worry, John Radson. We were just having a laugh. Yeah, John said with gloom gathering over his head. And what about that woman? Lonoth asked while pointing at the blonde Nord, Aldora. All that time, Aldora was locked in a makeshift cage. John tied her with the only type of knots he knew how to tie, which happens to be extremely kinky. That, right? John looked at the woman. Right, Aldora and I go way back actually. She's a thief turned mercenary and sailor and treasure hunter from Dawnstar. I tried to hire her to the Dare Corps many times, but she is as dishonest as they come. No one from Dawnstar likes you, John, Loneth said. Eldora was conscious and looking at John with glaring red eyes. After all, he killed her band of mercenaries and seemed to have some rivalry with them. John fucking Dare. She spoke. Eldora the Daring, you really got to stop this, he replied. It seemed the rivalry between John and Eldora wasn't about mercenary work only but also about titles. Dare and the Daring were awfully close to one another. The two of them led rival mercenary group. While John's symbol was the dragon, Eldora's symbol was the eagle. As only one king of the sky was supposed to exist, John pushed Eldora and her group so far to the point where they had to operate on ships and become naval mercenaries, the field where he was also considered the best in thanks to his Magica-powered ships. She's part of the reason I dislike blondes, John said. You've got an Altmare girlfriend with blonde hair last time I checked, Eldora said. Platinum, John corrected her. So, you took her for interrogation about Messener's plan? Glymet asked before the conversation derailed. I wouldn't bother with that murderous lying whore, but if you want to interrogate her, she's all yours. John replied, Personally, I'd like to focus on these memory crystals you collected. We've collected 3 of them, Loneth said, 1 from the ventral terminus, 1 from the halls of regulation, and the last from the treasure hunters. These memory crystals, or memory stars as the people here like to call them, are the records left by the dead God King Sotha Sil, John said while taking a heavy breath of anticipation. What do you expect we'll find out? Loneth asked. Secrets. Coda Spamton screamed, deep and dark. Truth. Ram reacted. Both. John nodded. And how will you read them? Glymet asked. John smiled and pointed at Ram. He can display them using his memory socket. But there are 2 vital requirements that we need, John said in a serious voice. What can they be? Glymet asked in full seriousness. Drinks and popcorn. With that, John and the group were about to witness the most important memories left by the creator of Clockwork City, the tribunal deity Sotha Sil. Chapter 684, Clockwork Heart. Chapter 684, Clockwork Heart. The mechanical sound of Ram's inner workings indicated his system accepting the new memory crystal. Ram's head alone can accept more than just one memory crystal and other add-ons that may add to his functionalities and personal memories, but right now, John asked him to display the memory crystals that Glymet and Loneth acquired. These memories were displayed on a blank sheet of cloth, which John spread over one of the assembly line box-like machines, so that Ram can aim his head towards it and send out the light and the sound that will project the memory. In other words, it is movie night now, but right from the get-go, a voice was heard from the recording along with the visuals of eye blinking. John and the group gathered closer to the projected image in order to figure out what they were seeing. It seemed that the memory was acting less than a movie but more like a record when the thoughts of the memory owner started to form together. This day has appeared in all my simulations. The end. My dear friend Almalexia has come to kill me. Now, everything depends on my calculations being correct. My machines need 22 minutes to seal the chamber of Lorcan. So that's how long I must live. A living deity at his final moment. For those who aren't aware about the events of 200 years ago, the 3 living deities of Morrowind lost their divine power with the disappearance of the Heart of Lorcan, which was caused by the Nerevarine, in order to stop the mad Daguth Uar. This affected them greatly. The Clockwork City was being threatened to cease existing, and the meteor floating above Vivec City was no longer stabilized by Vivec's power and would soon crash. Whereas Mournhold, the city of Almalexia, had no abnormalities like the 2, it was sunk in discord and turmoil. By that, Vivec was driven into more mysteries above his mysteries, Sotha Sil started working on his final desperate research, and Almalexia was just driven mad. The madness of Almalexia was directed towards the other two living deities, Sotha Sil and Vivek. She staged an attack by the clockwork creatures of Sotha Sil as a pretext to invade the clockwork city and kill Sotha Sil. Your time has come, Sotha Sil. All these years you've looked down on me. Have you any last words? Illustrious and endlessly beautiful and mad, Almalexia marched in her battle gear that outlined her curves just as neatly as it exposed her golden chimer skin. I am. Sotha Sil had a long sigh before thinking of her name and not uttering a single word. The woman that was the healing mother, the Lady of Mercy and Mother Morrowind, was reduced to a raging murdering medwoman, and the red of her hair was extended by the blood of the clockwork apostles she spilled on the way to the dome of Sotha Sil. Their fight was a swift one. Sotha Sil was a mage, but Almalexia was a warrior and a cut above any other warrior, one that lived through hundreds upon hundreds of years and warred with many Daedric princes and Akaviri warlords and vanquished them all. Your time has come, Sotha Sil. All these years you've looked down on me. Have you any last words? Almalexia took the silence of Sotha Sil as arrogance and cursed them with malice and hatred. Why are you silent? What are you hiding? Speak, curse you! Almalexia shouted till it actually made Sotha Sil almost lose focus. Fine then. Die, old friend. Fall before the one true God. Almalexia finished Sotha Sil with her blade Hope's fire, and watched him as he was left hanged and mingled on his machines. Sotha Sil's last fleeting thoughts started to echo through the memory crystal as the scene was fading to darkness. I have done it. He spoke as if he had done something big. Something that made his last moments worth it. Something that required his focus to be somewhere distant from the fight with Almalexia. I die, but what is death? A natural function. The thoughts became quieter, but Sotha Sil still had that same level of enthusiasm that filled him with a strange power, as if he was more alive than anyone else. The chamber is sealed, the work has begun. It will take approximately 207 years. But what is that? A rounding error. And then the words that made John spit his drink and Loneth scream from their wild shock were heard. The new heart of Lorcan will be completed, and it will power my city for all eternity. For those who understood the true meaning of these words from the memory crystal, the mention of the heart of Lorcan was akin to ringing bells and roaring thunder in their heads. John's stomach churned over so bad that he ran and started puking all its content. Loneth was so pale that by Dunmere standards, she would be a snow elf. But aside from the two, the rest had no deep knowledge of the arcana aside from Glymet's brief readings in the books he rarely enjoyed. The heart of Lorcan? Wasn't that a stone buried deep in the Red Mountain? Glymet asked. What's that anyway? Swim seemed to be less informed than Glymet regarding the heart. Azura, save us! Loneth shivered in clear panic. Should we get panic too? Coda asked with worry consuming him and causing him to stutter. Certainly, Ram answered emotionlessly. Loneth looked closely at the crystal that was embedded on Ram's head and felt hesitant before speaking on the verge of panic. The heart of Lorcan is one of the most powerful and dangerous artifacts in history, if not the most. It's what Sotha Sil and the other two tribunals used to become gods. She said with an obvious grim look. The stone disappeared from the world and was said to be destroyed. Liberated. At that moment, John, who was done vomiting and returned to the group with a sickly face, interrupted Loneth. The champion of Morrowind, the Nerevarine, liberated the heart of Lorcan by destroying the enchantment that sealed it in the Red Mountain. It returned to the world as it should be. I don't understand. Glymet spoke. Whether it is destroyed or liberated, Lorcan is the name of the divine being that created the world. I, at least, Know that his heart was ripped from him as a punishment for creating mortality, and it was turned to a stone and sealed in a volcano. Ripped from him, yes. Turned to stone, maybe. Sealed in a volcano, no. John commented. The heart itself was so powerful that it formed the volcano around itself when it fell into the sea. The dragon god fastened the heart on an arrow and sent it away so that the followers of Lorcan couldn't recover it. Lonoth added. The War of the Red Mountain happened between my ancestors, the Nords, Lonoth's ancestors, the Chimer and possibly Ram's ancestors, the Dwemer if we are not mistaken. The Nords tried to make sure, Lorcan, recover his heart, but the Chimer and the Dwemer opposed them. This led to the complete disappearance of the Dwemer as a race from all parts of Tamriel. The leader of the Chimer, Indoril Nerevar, was killed by his lieutenants who later used the artifacts of the Dwemer and the heart of Lorcan on themselves to become god-kings. These three lieutenants are Sotha Sil, builder of Clockwork City, Nerevar's wife Almalexia, who killed Sotha Sil in the memory we just saw, and lastly Vivek, who disappeared during the Oblivion Crisis. Wow! Swims at Night exclaimed, that's a lot of history. I feel like I've heard different accounts of this story before, but these were like folk tales when I was young. Historical facts, I'm afraid. Lonoth said before turning to Ram. I am sorry, we were planning to tell you the truth slowly and carefully. While expecting the young child to be devastated by either the disappearance of his possible race or the change of his other possible race, his response was rather, I see. Ram replied in the same emotionless mechanical voice he uses, but this time, more of his personality was being conveyed. Both John and Lonoth were suspecting him to be either Chimer or Dwemer. They haven't arrived at a conclusive answer yet, but as far as they are concerned, all there is to Ram is an incomplete personality construct stored on a memory crystal. But to think the heart of Lorcan is in this place? John immediately returned to the main issue they have on hand. It is not the real one. Lonoth corrected him. It is a new one made by the machines. How can mere machines replicate the heart of Lorcan, to begin with? John asked. We have seen the Eye of Magnus, another artifact that was attributed to an original spirit. Glymet said, then asked, by any chance are they the same thing? The heart of Lorcan, the Eye of Magnus, how related are they? It can be that if a part of an original spirit was separated from them, they would turn into an artifact. John theorized. Lonoth and John started thinking about the possibility, but there was no reference they know of or at least remember. On the other hand, Glymet seemed to be thinking as well. He remembered the confrontation he had with the Thalmor emissary in the College of Winterhold, the Altmare who was called Ancano. During his brief visit to Winterhold, Glymet assisted the College of Winterhold to defeat that Ancano when the latter managed to tap into the power of the Eye of Magnus and was almost unkillable, if not for the Staff of Magnus that was recovered and used by Alina Dare to take control of the Eye of Magnus. So, this new heart of Lorcan, are there any tools to control it? Like the Staff and the Eye of Magnus? Glymet asked. His question came with the memory of what he glimpsed in the core of the Eye of Magnus. Something he couldn't fathom back then, and no matter what he tried to remember what he saw and what he heard, it slips through his mind like a dream he saw a long time ago. The tools of Kagranak. Lonoth shouted immediately in response to Glymet's question. They are the artifacts that can. She then stopped talking immediately and turned to John. If they can, how can we acquire them? Glymet asked, but the answer was already in front of him. The tools of Kagranak, the 3 Dwemer artifacts that were crafted by Craftlord Kagranak of the Dwemer race. The first time they were used on the original Heart of Lorcan, they caused an entire race to disappear. John had those artifacts long ago before he left Skyrim on his 3 years' journey around Tamriel. He acquired them to fix his broken body after he managed to escape from the realm of Kaldharbor when he was trapped there by the vampires of the Fokihar clan. These 3 artifacts are the dagger keening, the hammer sunder, and the single gauntlet wraithguard. Each of the 3 artifacts has a very vital use during the process of utilizing the energy of the heart of Lorcan. The gauntlet wraithguard was designed to protect the user from the other 2 artifacts, as their powers were a league beyond what any mortal body can endure. It was also designed to empower the other 2 artifacts. The hammer sunder would be used to strike the heart and cause a specific type and amount of energy to be emitted from it. The enchantment of the hammer can draw vital and magical essence without touching the life essence of the heart. As for the dagger keening, it was sharp enough to cut through and reshape the energy of the heart that was drawing like sculpting on a clay mold. Its enchantment can also help with transforming and absorbing this power. You had these tools on you all the time? Swims at Night asked. I am this generation's owner and keeper of the tools of Kagranak. John replied with a foreboding tone. Morrowind has made many complaints over the years and asked me to hand them to the Dunmery Council, but these things are on a scale with weapons of mass destruction. I wouldn't trust a soul with them. That applies to everyone here. But, Lonoth tried to argue, but John interrupted. This new heart, whatever it is, may prove to be a tremendous pain in the ass for us. If the time comes and I find a need to destroy it, I will. John stated. Thank you. Lonoth nodded. I trust your judgment. Can't we take it and, I don't know, sell it? Swims asked. Everyone turned to Swims at Night with their eyes void of any expressions. Oh, did I speak that thought out loud? Swims backed off right away with an awkward laugh. I have a Daedric Titan pet called Zykel. I'll send him after your ass if you were to ever think of the idea of recalling the moment you had that thought, ever again. By Sit his. You guys can't take a joke. Swims made sure to put between him and John a good enough distance to start running for his life if the need arose. Then the new heart of Lorcan is what Messenger after all along? Glymet asked. If he already has that, I doubt any of us would still be alive. John said, let's hope the project was a failure and try to kill Messenger as soon as possible. Indeed. Glymet agreed with John wholeheartedly. From what I understand, the heart is vital for the life of this realm. We should consider leaving it be once the threat is dealt with. Destroy the new heart or preserve it, a tough decision that holds the fate of the entirety of Clockwork City and its inhabitants. A decision they'll have to take when the time comes. We need to gather more information then. Swims at Night spoke. We have more of these crystals, so let's see what they hold. He may have just spoken what was on everyone's mind, and from this point, they gave Ram the 2 remaining memory crystals. The information on these crystals didn't offer as big of a surprise as the first, but they learned a few more things. Some of these memories were the lessons Sotha Sil gave to one of his best apostles, Messenger. Messenger was young in these memories, and quite the eager and genius apprentice. He worked hard to please Sotha Sil and gain his acknowledgement, but Sotha Sil was always aloof and distant. Sotha Sil suspected Messenger's betrayal before it even arrived, but what he didn't suspect was the abominations that were created by Messenger, the same things he creates now to fight off John. Sotha Sil banished Messenger from Clockwork City and changed the locking combination on the chamber of Lorcan that contained the new mechanical heart. This was the good news that finally made the group calm down. If Sotha Sil has secured the chamber, it would take Messenger a lot of time to crack the locking combination. The other memory crystal was one much earlier than that of Messenger or the mechanical heart. It was about Dagoth Uar, the enemy of the tribunal gods. Long ago, during the War of the Red Mountain between the Nords, the Chimer and the Dwemer, Dagoth Uar was a subordinate of Lord Indoril Nerevar, leader of the Chimer, just like Almalexia, Vivek, and Sotha Sil before their apotheosis. In the account where the tribunal gods betrayed their leader Nerevar and used the power of the tools of Kagranak on the heart of Lorcan, Dagoth Ur opposed them and tried to avenge Nerevar but ended up defeated and presumed dead under the Red Mountain. Other accounts claim that he betrayed Nerevar, but that is mostly the side of the story told by the tribunal. After centuries, Dagoth Ur and his people, the House of Dagoth, were mutated by the effects of the Heart of Lorkhan after they were driven to extinction. They returned as ash vampires, beings of terrible power and extreme violence, and they ambushed the tribunal and ripped them off their divine powers, which caused the living gods to slowly decline over the years. At the end of the memory, Sotha Sil seemed to have created a new hidden chamber beyond the inner curiosity where the new mechanical heart was revealed. This memory showed how to access that chamber. Knowing how to reach the mechanical heart and how to exploit it, the team was finally a league of steps ahead of Messner. Only one thing remained. Activate the assembly line. John spoke and started punching switches on the machines he put together. By dawn, our army will be produced and we will go to war. Chapter 685, Clockwork Battle Arena. Chapter 685, Clockwork Battle Arena. Loading registered factotum construction schematics. Selected schematics. Combat Factotum Series 11, Weaponization. Energy Blade, Reflective Shield. Combat Factotum Series 13, Weaponization. Arquebus. Siege Factotum Series 8, Weaponization. Energy Cannons. Input Command. Produce 3 patches every wave. Each patch consists of 20 factotum, 2 from Series 8, 8 Series 13, and 10 from Series 11. Confirmation required. Confirm. Assembly line status. Integrity 100%. Energy supply optimal. Required material missing. Please load the raw material at the scavenging station. Alright, everyone. Start loading the junk. Today we turn this garbage pile into an army of fearless soldiers. John, Glymet, Lonoth, Swims at Night, Coda, Ram, and the tarnished boss mare that decided to hang out with them, started to move the junk from the large piles that surrounded the Pavilion of Artifice and load it into the scavenging point. The assembly line which John retrieved from the pneumatic forge consisted of many machines. The first of which is the angry and smoking Jumbo Scavenger, a beast of industry that can disassemble any intake into its raw forms. It can turn machines into scraps of metal and wires, turn wood into blanks and sawdust, and it can even turn people and animals into dust. The second machine was the Quisquiliarum Exactor, a very smart machine that can recognize and organize the disassembled materials and send them to various production lines. After the metal and the other materials needed for the factotum production were sent towards their respective supply lines, the Fornax Arma is the machine that was made to produce the factotums and arm them. There were 3 Fornax Arma machines that John was able to scavenge, and once he tried to mend them, he understood that they had the ability to 3D print various weapons and war machines. In the end, he linked all these machines to a central command unit, which he fortified in layers and layers of magical defense. This unit has become the Nexus Terminal, the link binding together his forces. One last thing, I want large energy cannons remodeled for defensive purposes. Do you have any models registered? John asked the Nexus machine that is organizing his assembly line. Searching database. 3 results found. APRC-1, HAMG-22, ECAP. Anti-personnel rotating cannon? Heavy artillery machine gun? Energy cannon or anti-personnel? Let's go with the heavy artillery machine gun. Confirmation required. Confirm and make 9 of them. Mark priority as top. Aside from the army John wanted, now started working on defenses for his assembly line too. The first defensive choke points were all around the Vale of Tears area where the energy was being drawn from. John placed 3 HAMG-22s in that area by installing them on high platforms and setting them to autofire at non-registered fabricants, i.e. Messner's abominations, as well as confirmed hostile entities. John started constructing 3 turrets near the assembly line and the Vale of Tears. The whole thing started to slowly turn into a military encampment. With the first patch of factotums ready, John sent them ahead on 3 routes heading towards the Brass Fortress to scout ahead. After them, he sent a few factotums to construct defenses on the 3 routes leading to the Brass Fortress. The southern route would lead to the Brass Fortress via its front gate. Practically, this is the most defended point there is. The northern route would lead to the Sanctuary of Verification, a place where many faulty factotums used to reside in the past and currently is a landfill. The central route would lead to the Mechanical Foundation, one of the largest and deepest facilities in Clockwork City. And just like how John constructed defenses on these 3 routes, Messner seemed to have done the same and started hoarding a new response force of abominations to deal with John's factotums. It seemed that we met in the middle of all 3 routes. I managed to establish 3 defense points on each route that are weaponized with turret. Messner seemed to have done the same. John said and started taking out a few bracelet-like items. At first, I wanted the factotums to fight and do the work for us, but it seemed that we won't be able to keep waiting. I want the 5 of you to head out there and assist the factotums to destroy Messner's defenses. John put the items on their wrists while he kept giving instructions. These bracelets will connect you with me. If you are injured or in danger, I can send you help or teleport you back here to the base. It can also tell you where you are and keep you connected with the others. Make sure to keep them on. Any weapon I can use? Swims asked. Blades, hammers, guns, cannons, this is a steampunk world, literally anything goes. John replied, but if you use the bracelet to teleport back to the Pavilion of Artifice, you'd find some good stuff lying around, arm yourself, and hurry back to the fight. And after we destroy those defenses? Lonoth asked. There should be the facilities where Messner deploys his forces from. Make sure you obliterate all that you see when you get past these defenses. John said. Bata Ale. Koda's persona changed into dragon and roared to the sky. Extreme Prejudice mode activated. Ram started rotating the barrels of his minigun with his eye sockets beaming red. I'm glad you two are excited. John said, one last thing, Messner probably has gathered some elite troops to destroy our defenses as well. I want you to intercept and kill them. Then it shall be. Glymet held his sword and got ready to lead the other. John Radson, which point do you recommend we should focus attacking on? For starters, the top lane. I mean the northern route. At least you and another 2 should be there while 2 of you guard and scout the other routes. If you are outnumbered by enemy elites, don't fight for victory but simply stall until reinforcements arrive and hide behind defenses. Once we gauge their ability, we may go to one of the other 2 lanes, routes, or keep pushing if it proves to be easier. You heard him, let's go smash some machines. Glymet headed off and was followed by the other 4 champions of this fight, Lonoth, Swims at Night, Koda, and Ram. Hey, I'll join too. Witnessing this inspiring scene, the tarnished boss mare held a spear and ran behind them to join the fight, but John had him by the nape of his shirt. You keep feeding the scavenger machine. Why, yes sir. And the boss mare ran back to work. John had a scary look on his face as he watched the 5 walk out of the Pavilion of Artifice. I don't like this. He murmured to himself, this is way too familiar for some horrible reason. And he returned to work as well to prepare for his battle against Messner. As Glymet and others reached the Vale of Tears where the assembly line was readying a new wave of factotums, a notification arrived on their bracelets. The first factotum wave has been annihilated. All right, here's how things shall go. Lonoth, you take the southern route. Ram, you take the middle route. Hold defensive positions and watch where the enemy may hide. Koda and Swims, you 2 follow me. Glymet said. Aye, Captain. Swims replied. Good luck, everyone. Lonoth added. Luck is overrated. 77% chance we are doomed. Ram said, headed towards the middle route, and vroomed straight ahead with his centipede wheels mode. Isn't he becoming more talkative? Lonoth asked while looking at Ram. He saved my life, but he's kinda annoying, to be honest. Swims agreed. Slandering a man behind his back, are we? Sorry, Glym. I'm heading off. Lonoth cast a hovering spell and swooshed towards the southern route. Let's head off, boys. And Glymet took the two lizard boys, Coda and Swims, towards the northern route. As they passed the first, second, and third defense lines, the 5 adventurers were at the front line when they all started to feel their enemies approaching. In the southern route where Lonoth was, she spotted an irregularly large pale-colored factotum coming her way from the enemy's direction. Its power seemed a league beyond what Lonoth can contend with. Hey, I am seeing an elite enemy. Large factotum, his energy is no joke. Lonoth reported via the bracelet she had. A hostile of similar description detected. Even from Ram's side a similar report came. I hear you. John received the reports. We should get the northern team to spare some of its members and join. This is the northern team. Swim's voice interrupted John's. We're seeing something big. Define big, John asked. Flying with 2 wings, has 4 limbs, looks like a dragon but smaller, and all mechanical. Swims replied. A titan. John realized. A clockwork titan. Just like the Daedric Titan Zykel, which is an imitation of a dragon, these clockwork titans are almost the same thing. We can deal with it, but we need time. Tell the other 2 to hold on. Glymet spoke to the others. Fine. Lonoth and Ram, when you 2 face your opponents, drain out their ground troops with yours, and make sure not to get hit too. Once your troops get destroyed, retreat to the first defense point and fight them under the cover of the turret. You may sustain some damage, but you'll hit them hard with the turret's help. I hear you. Lonoth aimed her staff forward, and with a wave of frost, she started assaulting the pale large factotum she spotted. As she took it by surprise from cover, her location was exposed and the factotum locked on her. She was still hovering to not be hindered by terrain as she moved around and kept kiting around the factotum while shooting him with multiple ice spikes in an attempt to freeze its limbs. Her plan was almost successful, but its power started to ignite with the sound of an engine raging within it, and the factotum broke the frost on its limbs by simply moving them. From its back, 2 mechanical compartments moved and the factotum took out a sword and an axe. You shall be purged. The factotum spoke. It is conscious. Lonoth realized what she was up against at this point. This wasn't a mindless factotum like the ones John was putting together. This is a living one, a factotum from the time of Sotha Sil. In truth, factotums weren't just the servants and soldiers of Sotha Sil, but also his creation, his people. They weren't mindless machines like those of the dwarves. Much like Ram, they had life within them. The factotum crouched to the ground in a squat position, and with a shockwave, it jumped high up with its weapons aiming for Lonoth. Seeing this brutish machine coming at her, Lonoth was overwhelmed for a moment, but in a split second, she activated an artifact on her body and immediately blinked from her place. Just like that, the factotum landed where Lonoth was, and seeing her not where he landed, he turned around where he sensed her magicka from. She was still hovering not too far from him, but this time, she had a grin on her face. You may be a subordinate of an arch-wizard, but I am a master wizard, you know. With her saying that, the area around the factotum started to glow, and in a moment, the pale factotum could see an array of trap runes flashing red around it. A series of fire runes went boom. This explosion consumed almost all of the abomination's soldiers sent by Messner and half the factotums sent by John, with the enemy pale factotum in its center. Just as the explosion dust settled, a silhouette started to walk from the dust and smoke caused by the explosion. The pale factotum was still there and didn't suffer a scratch from Lonatha's trap. "I'll carve your inside out like how I did with them fat Nords." The factotum screamed and charged at Lonath once again. She kept evading and dodging. Lonath found a spot to teleport to, and with the time she acquired, she gathered enough magicka and released her ancestral power, the ancestral wrath. A wave of flame wreathed her surroundings, and from it, she drew an enormous amount of power before channeling it into a beam towards the pale factotum. Even her eyes radiated like the fire she cast. The factotum blocked with its hand, but at the expense of its short blade, and started getting pushed back slowly but surely. Lonath was confident she could take him on. Meanwhile, Ram was facing a large white factotum that used a staff and cast magic. "Amsavai, where are your voices? We need you now more than ever." The factotum spoke in a tone filled with sadness. "Unable to answer," Ram replied. "Then who will save us? Who will lift us from the depth of oblivion?" "Unable to answer," Set promised. He promised he would let us rest. Now I don't feel him. I feel nothing but strange, unbearable hate. Where is Set? Answer me. Unable to answer. Then perish. The two mechanical constructs were slowly getting agitated by one another. The factotum seemed to have been wronged by Sotha Sil, and is going through something personal, but it started raising its staff, and called a great barrage of arcane bolts towards Ram. Ram moved away around all the attacks, and when he got the chance, he started spraying the enemy with his Gatling gun. The white factotum was dodging and teleporting skillfully, and closed on Ram many times, but Ram utilized his ground, and would retreat to the cover of his team's turret before returning to the factotum with stronger and fiercer firepower. Seeing that Ram was using a set of centipede tracks to move around and maintain a good grip on the ground, the white factotum figured out that by destroying the ground, it would make Ram a sitting duck. A lightning spell came from the factotum's staff, and its target was the ground. Just like how a farmer plows the earth, the spell started to turn the ground upside down and close on Ram from all directions in order to devastate him with strong lightning strikes. Ram was speeding and shooting, and as he was feeling cornered, he tried to maneuver past the spell range, yet the white factotum didn't give him the chance to. Once he was in the eye of the storm, Ram's body started to change. Jet thrusters infusion. Without getting himself cornered, Ram had to ditch the ground and hover with his jet thruster, which he could transform his lower part into. He even shot a couple of explosive attacks to divert attention and escape from the spell-effective range before changing his weapon from a Gatling gun to railgun infusion, and with a charging sound, the railgun was ready and aimed at the white factotum. As for the third front, Glymet was fending off the flame attacks of the Clockwork Titan, while Coda, Dragon, was holding on to one of the Titan's wings and biting into it, while Swims at Night was held by the Titan's hands. "You are not wanted. None of us are wanted. Set has forsaken us," said the Clockwork Titan as it was fighting with agony and despair. The factotums and all the clockwork constructs may be mechanical constructs, but the suffering they are displaying is real. Something wasn't right. Glymet fought, and despite the difficulty they were up against, the three of them were pushing back the enemy. Just when they were confident enough to take it down, another one of those elite enemies showed up. Glymet noticed it first, but it was a fast abomination that moved on a single wheel rather than legs, and was very quiet and stealthy. Its aim was Glymet, but the latter was able to evade the rush attacks. This abomination had more than 2 arms. Almost 6 arms were stitched to its back aside from its natural 2 arms, and all of them had blades on their end. This grotesque thing turned on its wheel very nimbly, and with a zombified head, it stared at Glymet and launched itself towards him again. Glymet immediately evaded and picked a broken spear from the ground before throwing it into the wheel of that abomination thing. The spear jammed the wheel, and the abomination was stopped and fell immediately on its face. Glymet didn't waste the chance, and with his flaming blade, Goldbrand, he wiped the abomination off existence. Just as he did so, Swims at Night was thrown by the Daedric Titan, who felt the pressure elevated when Glymet was busy dealing with the abomination, and in the same motion, it rammed Coda into a wall and put him down. Glymet immediately jumped to the rescue and instructed the two to retreat using their bracelet. They would go back to the Pavilion of Artifice, arm themselves with new weapons and potions, and come back to the fight in full energy. Meanwhile, in the Vale of Tears, John was still thinking of the rotten feeling that crossed his chest a while ago. At that time, Glymet had just defeated the Abomination Elite and went ahead to face the Clockwork Titan on his own when a notification message reached John from the Assembly Line Control Unit. First Blood. An enemy has been slain. John's eyes widened as he was struck with realization. This rotten feeling. I knew it. If you find any errors, ads pop-up, ads redirect, broken links, non-standard content, etc. Chapter 686, Clockwork Legends. Chapter 686, Clockwork Legends. 4. 3K words, double Chapter 1 guess. Part 1. Damn the accursed fates! Shouted the Clockwork Titan as it was ordered to retreat by Messenger. Glymet was panting and out of stamina, but he couldn't stop now that his companions had returned. Swims, you stay here in case the Titan returns. Coda, you follow me. Glymet gave orders and started to retreat as well in order to recover. Good work, old man. John's voice echoed from the bracelet. You should return and take some items from the Pavilion of Artifice. I can't do that. I need to get to Lonoth and Ram. Glymet said. In terms of combat, they are stalling their enemies well. Still, you must go to either Lonoth or Ram. Ram is the closest. I still advise you to return. John said. I'll do that later. Now, what is the fastest direction to Ram? Glymet asked. Check the map function on the bracelet. You should navigate through the Mire Mechanica. John replied. This dense jungle? Glymet seemed uncomfortable with stepping into the unknown. God damn it! Don't say that word! John freaked out on the other end. What? Why? Glymet frowned. Fuck it! John sighed in a bad mood. Yes, you have to jungle. Happy now? Whatever you say. Glymet seemed in no mood to argue with John remotely, and stepped into the Mire Mechanica along with Coda. The two of them traveled as fast as they could, and thanks to Coda's Argonian nature, they were crossing the mire at a good speed. Old man. John's voice was heard again. Yes. Glymet asked. I've sent some supplies across the Mire Mechanica since you're too stubborn to return. You'll find these supplies stashed into mortar shells. John said. That's a great help. I guess I felt something falling just now. Glymet went off for a while and John kept tracking his movements through the bracelet's map. Found it, Glymet said, but I guess some of the Mire natives have taken a liking to your gifts too. Don't tell me what they are and just dispose of them. John replied while praying in his heart. Two-headed wolves, huh? Glymet reported the appearance of the monster he saw. John wanted to block his ears but... Merc wolves. Delicious. Coda, dragon, screamed. I hate my life. Your team has destroyed a turret. John decided to be silent from this point on. Whoever does what, he is protesting at the rogue machine that kept bringing out his dark memories. Who destroyed the turret just now? Lonoth asked. I did. Ah. Who's the most handsome treasure hunter and smuggler Argonian in Tamriel now? Swims replied with a proud laugh. Good job, Swims. Glymet replied as he managed to liberate the supply drop from the monsters. Be careful now, they will focus their defenses against you. What? Why me? Swims asked in a shaken tone. You're the one who destroyed a turret. Glymet replied playfully. Damn it! A minute later, Glymet and Coda broke through the mire and stumbled on the sorry sight of Ram, who was being cornered by the white factotum. Without further ado, Coda picked a small boulder and tossed it at the mechanical elite, causing the latter to evade just as Glymet sent a wave of flames at it. The two cooperated instinctively to get Ram out of his corner as the latter activated the escape sequence on his bracelet. Facing the white factotum now was Glymet and Coda, who reversed the situation since the white factotum is a much easier opponent than the Clockwork Titan. They pushed him back fast enough that they were in the range of the enemy defense line. Unlike John's Gatling gun tower, this defense system was rather a magical one that shoots arcane bolt. It was hard to dodge still and annoyed Glymet a lot, but Coda was keeping his distance and throwing anything he saw at anything, whether it was the tower, the white factotum, or the abomination minions. Glymet plodded swiftly and rushed behind the enemy's defense point to corner the white factotum at the expense of a couple of hits from the defense tower, which he managed to tank, and pincered the white factotum with Coda. Seeing that both his retreat and attack options were blocked, the white factotum took cover from Glymet and focused his firepower on Coda. From his staff, 10 highly concentrated bolts of lightning were formed, and their target was the oversized Argonian. These attacks were highly lethal, yet once again, Glymet decided to tank one hit from the defense tower to fish him out of his cover and save Coda. As the white factotum evaded the danger of Glymet's attacks, it noticed a shadow growing around over its head, and out of literal nowhere, a large boulder descended on the white factotum, leveling it with the ground. An enemy has been slain. Nice! Glymet shouted in excitement, but he saw something happen to the white factotum and Coda. As for the factotum, it was too broken to move, but as its chest piece burst out, Glymet could see a black soul gem resting inside its chest and connected to the factotum in a weird mechanical way. As for Coda, he seemed very exhausted and shrunk back from his dragon persona to the normal, cowardly Coda. Shit, John, Coda must retreat to recover. Send Ram to the middle route while I rush to aid Lonoth. Glymet called. Yes. Hurry. Lonotha's voice interrupted the call. 2 more elite abominations are joining the damn elite factotum. It's okay, John replied calmly. Old man, you remain where you are. I've already activated the escape sequence on Coda's bracelet. Watch out for the abominations. But Lonoth is, Glymet shouted. I said it's okay. Help is on the way. John replied, Ram, drop altitude. On the southern route, a buzzing sound was heard as an object came dropping from the sky at an unimaginable speed, and it started to swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of the Gatling gun sounded with 4 lines of smoke speeding amidst the hail of bullets towards the enemies that were facing Lonoth. The 2 of them were assassin abominations, the same kind of many-armed single-wheeled abomination which Glymet faced at the northern route. These abominations, as well as the pale factotum that was chasing Lonoth, were hit directly by the hail of bullets and 4 bombarding missiles. The sheer destructive power of this air-to-ground attack was so great that it killed the 2 elite abominations on the spot. An enemy has been slain. Double kill. Activating Lightning Blade. Ram suddenly started to break apart in the air and separate from the temporary flying parts before descending in a straight beeline towards the pale factotum, and a blue thin line was seen cutting it through. Where Ram landed was far behind the pale factotum, which didn't even stagger before sliding part from part as the cut appeared in a thin line from its left shoulder to its right side, and it fell completely disabled. Triple kill. Amazing Ram! Lonoth shouted while she staggered from exhaustion. Just at this moment, the factotum lying between them started to glow brightly as if magic was activating from within, and as the 2 avoided the possible attack, they found out that the pale factotum was teleported away. The same thing happened in the middle route where Glymet is. Once John heard of that and heard about what Glymet noticed in these factotums, he started thinking. Factotums powered by black soul gems. I've read about this somewhere. John said, the black soul gems are the only kind of soul gems that can house a black mortal soul. Originally, natural geode, soul gems, can't house mortal souls thanks to their nature, which is different from every lesser creation. But throughout history, a few people have discovered the method to create black soul gems. The first who are theorized to have done so are the Ideal Masters, Lords of the Soul Cairn, a realm for the dead. The Ideal's Masters were said to have existed before the first era way back in the prehistoric times of the Merethic era. The second to have discovered the Black Soul's gems was either Sotha Sil or Lady Vastari, a former worm cultist and the immortal Witch of Azura, via reverse engineering the regular soul gems. Currently, Mannimarco the Worm God is the fastest entity that can create those black soul gems. If these soul gems in the chests of those factotums weren't made by the worm cult, then we are looking at something very, very ancient. Sotha Sil's soul trapped some of his followers to give them immortality as machines, so if I am not mistaken, those factotums you just fought are historical figures. He's always this detail-oriented? Swims asked while shaking his head from the amount of information John just poured into their ears. He's a fourth-generation apprentice of Divaith Fyr. Lonath defended John. Either way, John ignored them. Ram and Lonath, you two have nothing in your way now. Press forward and destroy their first defense. Make sure those factotums that retreated don't surprise you. On it, Ram replied. I need to recover a bit more, Lonath complained. Guys! Swims at Night shouted, I am being pressured here by those weird things. John. Send Coda to Swims once he recovers. Glymet spoke to John. No. I'll send Coda to Ram and Lonath in the south. John said, Swims, I want you to drag those abominations away to the mire. You'll have a terrain advantage there since you are an Argonian and they move on wheels. Once you are done with them, rush to where Ram and Lonath are. All right. Swims didn't disagree and started taking his enemies to the mire. Old man, you should destroy the turret in front of you to cause the enemy to panic, then move to the southern route as well. Once the 5 of you are there, you should break through any defense in front of you. This is risky, John. Glymet complained. This is a trap, old man. John replied. Messner is now busy dealing with you and thinking that he should save his strength to face me. He's focusing too much on the game now. If he sends any of his machines to the Vale of Tears, I shall welcome them in person. Best of luck then. John's trickery was working so far. Glymet didn't want to complain since he was also focused on the current fight while John was planning for 3 fights ahead already. Also, it is not wise to go against a trustworthy commander. The plan accelerated smoothly. Glymet managed to destroy a turret while Ram and Lonath also destroyed a turret with the help of the combat factotums. This meant that the enemy was set back by a complete stage of defense on all 3 fronts. The problem now is the front John was aiming for, the southern route, or in other words, the main gate of the Brass Fortress. This was the least point one would expect for an attack to come from. The bulwark of the fortress is made of thick metal and almost impossible to destroy, but the plan was to go forward this way. Who knows if this is a double trick or a triple one? As the 5 champions gathered in the southern lane, they destroyed another turret and started to meet the new patch of elite abominations. The combined efforts of the 5 overwhelmed any enemy in their way, and they reached the final defense line at the gate of the fortress. There, they clashed with the final turret and vanquished their foes, but the amount of the elite enemies that faced them started to increase. Ram took care of all the small fries thanks to his spray-and-pray tactic, while Glymet tanked for the rest and took care of any harassment done by the enemy. Finally, the final turret has fallen. John, we have entered the city from the southern route. The first gate was broken long ago, but there is a large barricade far in the city that will block us. Lonath reported. All right. It seems that all the fight right now is happening in your direction. Is there any sign of Messenger? No, she replied. I see, this slimy fucker. John cursed in a low tone. Be on alert, make sure you uncover the machine that is creating those abominations and destroy it. On it! The group didn't dally longer and destroyed a large device that was one of the defensive systems used by the Brass Fortress, which was used to put limitations on hostile abilities. The moment this device was destroyed, Lanath and John felt like their ability to contact the other realms like Oblivion and such has been restored, and they are now capable of manually escaping Clockwork City to Oblivion and also capable to conjure the Daedra and the undead of Oblivion. With this, a whole new league of possibilities was opened. Lanath used specialty magic, conjuration, and spammed a score of frost atronachs left and right. Those brutish and colossal golems of ice didn't spare any abomination and destroyed all they could touch, such as the terrifying power of a conjuration master. We are coming to your aid, Outlanders! And amidst the heat of battle and from the insides of the Brass Fortress, multiple men and women in brass and white attires started to flood the battle between John's factotums and Messenger's abominations, targeting Messenger's horrendous creations. The Clockwork Apostles. Swims at Night looked at the unexpected reinforcements and smiled with glee. I am not the heroic sort, but damn, this thing has its moments. Don't stop. We need to uproot those fuckers before more of them are created. Galen, the leader of the Clockwork Apostles, shouted at his comrades as he led a powerful charge. This all happened while Coda, who didn't shift into his dragon persona, was fighting a desperate fight against a single abomination before a Clockwork Apostle fell in the fight and his weapons rolled to Coda. Seeing this advanced clockwork arquebus, Coda held it up and immersed himself in its marvelous firepower. At this point, an elite abomination spotted Coda and charged towards him with its blade aiming to rip the petite Argonian apart. In retaliation, Coda aimed the arquebus at the abomination and took one shot at it, but he didn't expect the explosive recoil and barely grazed it. The abomination staggered, but it was too close to Coda to give up now, and its mind was remodeled into that of a killing machine. Coda felt like he wasn't going to survive this, but in a blue flash, Ram interrupted the abomination and killed it with his blue lightning blade. Seeing how far those two oddballs came together, they started to develop some sort of camaraderie from which a new technique was developed. It only needed Coda to ask for it. I need to get to high ground in order to shoot better, Coda said. Mobile shooting compatible? Ram asked. I guess so, Coda replied. Ram then turned around and left his back open for Coda. This invitation was for Coda to hop on Ram's shoulder, since one was a small Argonian and the other was a large factotum. Coda didn't hesitate and climbed up before attaching himself to Ram and readying his arquebus. Ram then did Coda something incredible. He handed him the Gatling cannon. Just as Coda held it, his eyes brightened up, widened, and a new air started to flow around him. With a confident smile, he sneered and aimed the Gatling cannon forward. Ho ho ho! Cheers, mate! This is what I call fair dinkum awesome. Coda said in a voice that appeared very different. Let's blast the heads of those bloody wankers, shall we? At this moment, Ram started slicing and dicing while Juan, Coda's maniac persona, focused on spraying the bullets with extreme prejudice. Part 2. Meanwhile, in the Pavilion of Artifice, Nefertiti suddenly dashed towards John and jumped while transforming into her human form to crash into his face. What girl? John asked. The shadow is open, Homin, she replied. John looked at her and a smile formed on his face slowly. Come out, you idiots, John called with a wide grin. To this call, the shadow beneath him expanded and many figures started to emerge from that darkness. The first was a gigantic warrior armored in bone samurai armor and swords, Odakuro of Wrath. The second was a black horse that looked like a walking dark ghost with 8 legs rather than 4, Sleipnir of Greed. The third was a translucent woman with great beauty and nothing to cover her sinful curves, Venus of Lust. The fourth was a black floating dragon priestess with a red-eyed ornate skull for a head, Potima of Envy. The fifth was a creature of gore and blood that made anything made by Messner look bearable, Gluttony. And last but not least, the sixth was a staff that rose in front of John and rested dearly in his hand, Pride. John and his sin artifacts, which were hiding in the shadow dimension for protection, were finally reunited and ready to wreak havoc. John stood up and snapped his finger to return them all to his ring. He then called out one item, a long polearm with a spearhead, an axe head, and a hammerhead. The infamous halberd that the Dragonborn uses to hunt dragons, the unenchanted yet nigh indestructible weapon, Cliffhanger. John held that weapon and headed towards the middle lane. Meanwhile, in the enemy's stronghold, a sudden shift of momentum happened when some elite enemies started to emerge. Coming from the back of the enemy lines, the Clockwork Titan, the White Factotum, and the Pale Factotum all seemed to have been repaired after being called back by Messner. They launched an attack against the group of champions and the Clockwork Apostles, which showed how much those three were terrifyingly strong, and their power together was multiplied and supported greatly. No. Why are they here? Galen, the Clockwork Apostle, shouted in a fearful tone. Galen, who are those? Loneth asked as she tried to stop the Clockwork Titan with her atronach, but they were all being pushed back. These are. Just as Galen was about to reveal the identity of Messner's 3 champions, a strange feeling covered the battlefield. It started with a ground tremor that was felt vividly even in this heated battle. What came next was something unexpected. Your team has destroyed a turret. Those who saw the message couldn't pinpoint its cause, but just some seconds later, another message followed. Your team has destroyed a turret. The turret defense line guarding the middle lane, which was already abandoned, was destroyed so badly that a cloud of dust blocked the view of that area. The parts of the destroyed turret came flying from the direction of the mechanical foundry where the middle route led, and as something started to break the place apart, the ground started to shake with every single tremor caused by the culprit of that ruckus just now. It was safe to say that the abominations, those senseless mishmashes of flesh and machine, have grown a survival instinct towards what was coming from the mechanical foundry, and even the ones that came from there were actually escaping. One of the elite abominations, which was a towering giant, was suddenly split into 2 vertical halves when a black ebony weapon descended from upward and split it off. You have slain an enemy. The weapon was dragged away, and as the tower abomination's halves fell aside in synchrony, the culprit was revealed. He was wearing the Lord's mail and a Nordic steel helmet of ancient designs. His blue eyes, red hair, and pale skin were the only things that were visible of him when he approached the battle slowly. To his allies, this was the most powerful existence that would dominate the field. To his enemies, this was a menace, and their reactions to him were surprising. The abominations appeared as if they have awakened a survival instinct, the factotums seemed to be considering him a commander, and the Clockwork Apostles were threatened and taken by his existence, but the strangest reaction so far was that of the 2 elite factotums that are white and pale as well as the Clockwork Titan. Those 3 in particular seemed to have gone silent and stopped talking altogether. They were always complaining about Sotha Sil, praying to Sotha Sil or cursing Sotha Sil. Right now they seemed to have forgotten about Set all at once. They saw someone they recognized, a Nord warrior with a great weapon resting on his shoulder, marching towards them in fire and smoke while stomping on brass as if it was grass and forming a river of blood wherever he steps. Their mortal enemy, their people's enemy, their home's enemy, their oppressor, their conqueror, their slayer. Zuyu lost bo fat hin klavark, Zuyu fent cryin hyas hin ra. The Nord spoke an alien tongue, but the more he spoke, the more the world started to tighten and the more suffocating it felt even for the lungless machines. It is him, no doubt about it. It is the walking legend. The King of Nords. The pale factotum spoke. The gray shadow king. The white factotum spoke. Wolf Hearth. The clockwork titan spoke. Only one man they knew was arrogant enough to speak not in the tongue of man or mare, but only in the tongue that would make the world shake. Ismir Wolfhearth. The man who just boldly said that he will slay them all and offer their heads to their gods for mockery. In this situation, the three historical factotums returned to their minds for mere moments, but it was suddenly replaced with frenzy, murderous frenzy. Not by the malicious control of Messenger but by the will of the three to fight, to rumble, to kill their mortal enemy. Their surroundings turned to the vision of Red Mountain Vardenfell, where those three once stood to keep the King of Nords from approaching Nerevar the Hortator and Dumak Dwarf King. This was the moment they fell, the moment they died to the man's murderous weapon, the moment they finally get to rewrite in history. Wolf Hearth. But the voice they heard was cold, so cold like the long winter. Almost. It continued. And then all the soldiers they have amassed to buy time for Lord Nerevar. Time to convince the dwarves to stop their folly. The man flew towards them, and he shredded their soldiers with blade and voice. He was the storm, if the storm was a man who shatters them and breaks their limbs and hearts. Killing spree. The champions of the Ashlands and the lords of the Velothai mountains fell to him non-stop. Rampage. He spared none. He killed those he can reach with his great weapon and those he can't reach with his storm words. Dominating. He raged through their ranks and started laughing as he killed more and more. Unstoppable. He towered over them the same way he towered over his enemies through history, the same way he killed the Aldmer at the front of the armies of man, the same way he slew the wild elves of the Heartlands till his hair became red, the same way he conquered the snow elves of Skyrim until they were eaten by the dwarves. Godlike. And when he killed all their armies, he stopped in front of the three and they all could see him. If not Wolfhearth, then who else is that? And as they wanted to buy just a single second, their metallic limbs failed them and they crumbled apart against his mighty weapon. Legendary. He raised his hand and just before the three mechanical things would be withdrawn away, he used telekinesis and ripped the black soul gems from their chests. No! At the sight of that, Galen, the leader of the Clockwork Apostles, shouted and ran towards John hoping for him to spare those soul gems, but Glymet held him from doing so. Those are the saints. Let me save them. I beg of you. Galen cried. Don't. He'll kill you. Glymet was worried since the John Dare he sees at the moment is beyond any that he knows. There was no light-heartedness here. He came for destruction and destruction is what he is committing. This is a man who would strike and the world would strike with him, one of fate, a champion with destiny just like how he was. As John held the three black soul gems in one hand, he spoke one word. Gluttony. His words caused the messy monster of blood and gore to emerge from his shadow, a monster like none other. Eat. And John fed the three souls of the Dunmare saints to gluttony. Saint Felms the bold, Saint Lothus the pious, Saint Olms the just. After thousands of years in an artificial state of immortality, John sacrificed the three Dunmare saints to his gluttony. And for the first time, gluttony evolved and came to possess a body of its own, a body that is as large as wrath, as sick as greed, and as ghostly as lust and envy. It was bipedal, yet its arms were almost reaching the ground, and its head was crowned with bloody red tree branches that looked like antlers. This monster was once a leeching root from a briar-heart tree, which John was once imprisoned with, and it leached on him like a parasite for long, causing him the hardest time of his life. It evolved to blood ether, a spiritual parasite that fed on anything living, and in the end, it became a monster beyond any abomination created by Messner, a perfect abomination if words were to give it justice. Gluttony, Briar Heart vampiric parasite, vampiric gore servant, Briar Grove, Wendigo new personification of gluttony. Chapter 687, Clockwork Pickles. Chapter 687, Clockwork Pickles. With the rise of John's own abomination, the battle was facing a drastic change. Gluttony has manifested its own personification in the shape of Wendigo, a creature of horror and nothing but the horror that the look of it would make the innards of the lookers churn in pain and twist in agony. As the creature was let loose on the battlefield, it charged at all the abominations in its way and started to rip their flesh off their mechanical part and add it to its own. It devoured everything without discrimination like a wolf in a flock of sheep. You madman! What have you created? What have you done? Set curses you! Unbearable to the sight of the Clockwork Apostles, their leader Galen rushed at John with a face dampened with tears. Glymet failed to stop him as he was occupied by the abominations that still fought, and so when Galen wanted to clash with John, the latter held him by the neck and raised him as he struggled with the unbelievable power of the choking clutch. Set is dead. John replied, Your false idol can't curse, let alone protect. He shall curse you, Saint Killer! Galen shouted. Ha! John laughed. I like zealots like you, but you are blinding yourself by yourself. John threw Galen off and walked away. The world of Sotha Sil is a mockery of reality, the divinity of Sotha Sil is a mockery of true divinity, even this so-called resurrection is a mockery of creation. I'd argue that Mannimarco has done a better job than Set playing with soul gems and bringing back the dead. To such a statement, Galen couldn't bear what he heard. Howdy! He was about to burst into rage at John, but just as the words were on the tip of his tongue, John was already staring at him with a deep dark stare. One more breath and it is the last, no need for words to convey that. The dormant survival instinct of the mammals inside the mortal races is enough to interpret the look in John's eyes. All Galen could do was freeze until John looks away and leaves him be. After that, he slowly started to tremble while touching the fortunate neck between his head and shoulders. As for John, he had a personal reason to sacrifice the souls of 3 Dunmary saints to gluttony. Those 3 were enemies of his ancestors, and he wasn't really keen on letting some ghosts with grudges against his own race keep haunting some clockwork war machines. And while it may cause a diplomatic deterioration between him and the Dunmare people, he was sure that no one would believe that some Dunmare heroes from the First Era survived in black soul gems till the Fourth Era. Moreover, nowadays opinion about trapping souls in black soul gems is really frowned upon. Thus if word gets out that Sotha Sil had 3 saints trapped in soul gems and John Dare broke those gems, most of those who would hear it would think badly of Sotha Sil before questioning what John did. Truth is a funny thing. It can be very subjective. As for the current situation, it was almost concluded. John had the assembly line of Messner's abominations destroyed, and beyond it, he uncovered the atrocities he did to the creatures of the clockwork realm. Both apostles and fabricants were captured by Messner and subjected to horrid transformations and mechanical implants that were part of some sick crossbreed between alchemy and engineering. Beyond it was a laboratory where Messner seemed to have conducted some experiments and preserved some of his results in cylinder glass tubes filled with green liquid. These were the base forms on which the army of abominations was being constructed. He made people go through this kind of torture? For what? Glymet asked. A mad scientist wouldn't need an excuse to turn their fellow man into jarred pickles. John replied with a long sigh, then let out a short laugh. Imagine it, pickling people. And as he remarked that, a voice replied with the same amount of mockery John conveyed. Pickling? Please, don't spout such hearsay. It is atrocious. Ah, the pickle man himself, lord of the clockwork pickles. John turned in the direction of the voice to see Messner standing alone on a far-off platform where a mad scientist would get a full view of his mad experiment. What you see here is the fruits, Pickles, of my excellence in the biomechanical field, Messner said with a mild interruption from John. I have created life forms that go beyond reason, John Dare. You see there, these beautiful creations have their vital organs powered and energized to emit the same level of vitality a living being has. So they have emotions? Feelings? Thoughts? Glymet asked. Maybe, John replied. No, I wouldn't do that to them. Messner replied. I am not that monster you are painting me in your head, gentlemen. I am just like your friend here. He uses mortal bodies and Daedric vessels for necromancy all the time. I use them in different ways. I don't mass murder people to raise their corpses, John said. I didn't murder people either. I captured them alive for the purpose of making life forms. I can't grant people life, not yet anyway. Messner replied, and before you all think badly of Mez, your friend John Dare treated his enemies that were bandits, pirates, and dragon cultists much worse than I. I do, John replied. Those who intend to terrorize my people have given me full permission to terrorize them the same way they would do to those innocents I protect. Quit trying to relate your methods with mine. Fine. You're much better and ethical than the filthy me, Lord John Dare. Messner murmured while rolling his eyes. Damn right I am. On the other hand, John crossed his arms and wore an expression of pride on his face. Enough with that. Glymet felt tired of the two. For your crimes, Messner, you shall answer to the people. See what I am talking about? Messner asked John. That's the kind of attitude that gets people killed. If you have enough power to enforce your laws, you are free to enforce them. As I said, those who intend on terrorizing people have given their permission to be treated less than humans, John said while aiming his staff at Messner. Oh, come on. Messner, however, sneered widely. You really think that the evil wizard would come to face the heroes after you've annihilated his evil army? No one had the time to reply or to expect what was going to happen next. The land started to shake and a sense of danger started to crawl under everyone's skin or scales, in the case of Swims and Coda. Just as they were about to jump at Messner and try to capture him to get ahead of what disaster he was brewing, the land beneath them collapsed and a large maw full of fangs and teeth rose from within to swallow them whole. Shockwave. John had a spell ready and in less than a second, he sent everyone around him as far from the new-coming monster as possible. He alone was in the middle of the attack, and the owner of that large maw attempted to swallow John, who was holding the jaws of the thing with sheer physical strength. Oh, Azura! Loneth recovered from the shockwave and saw the head of the thing that was trying to eat John. The madman! Even Swims at night was stunned by what he saw. What the fuck? John, on the other hand, was trying to figure out the identity of his attacker as he felt immense pressure from the jaw power that thing had. It looked mechanical, the same as anything else in Clockwork City, but it had organic parts just like most fabricants, the animals that dwell in this realm. I promised Set I would create the most perfect life form, something to surpass him, something he can never do. As he felt threatened by my talent, he cast me out of his world. Out there, I felt I could never do it, and even amidst my search for the city, I wasn't confident I would fulfill my promise until I met you, John Dare. You have my short version, please, John said as he was struggling against the thing. Huh. Messner didn't notice John was still struggling under the maw's pressure since he didn't have a good angle on that site. I'd sooner die to this thing before you finish your speech, you long-winded bastard. John cursed. Somebody give me a TLDR. It's a dragon. Glymet shouted. A clockwork dragon. Added to Discord gallery. Bastard. John managed to muster enough strength to push back the dragon's jaw and jumped as far as he could. Roheawayer! But the beast that crawled from the earth was right behind him. John jumped and flew off the facility by crashing its window, and the dragon chased him by crashing through the walls and the roof. Above the city a man levitated in the air, and to boost his speed, he used his incredible leg power to jump from one building to another as the building he came from exploded and a large shadow came from within. Two large wide wings covered the light of the sky as a creature of myth and legend appeared over the legendary city. A dragon made of machinery, skin and flesh. The apostles looked at the sky as if their world has ended and couldn't breathe from the terror they saw. Even when John looked behind him as he ran, he didn't believe Messner had created a dragon fabricant, a clockwork dragon. It was mindless, beastly even, programmed with crazed behavior, possessed no Thursdayum, but it was a devastating machine of war. John couldn't fight this thing in the city, the casualties would be too great. He needs to return to the Mire Mechanica and deal with it one-on-one. With one move, Messner eliminated John from the equation once again and kept him busy outside the brass fortress. But the destruction left behind by the clockwork dragon caused Glymet and the rest to be trapped in the facility, and if not for the help of Ram, they wouldn't be able to clear the debris that blocked the entrance. Shit. Everyone all right? Glymet fixed his posture after moving a broken wall with telekinesis and reuniting with his companions. Where's John? Lonoth asked. Before anyone would answer her question, a tremor was felt through the city, and in the far distance, a tower was toppling as the dragon raced with its prey and attempted to block his way. As the tower fell apart, a mage was seen soaring through the sky, and just as the dragon started to release its artificial dragon breath, the falling part of the tower was sucked into a large portal. Another appeared above the clockwork dragon, and the fallen tower was redirected on the dragon's head. Let's not ask such questions ever again, Swims said. Where is Messner then? Glymet asked. Coda thinks he saw them leave in a flash. Coda replied as he was trying to drag out his sledgehammer from beneath a broken wall. He can be anywhere, Swims said. To escape this place, we need to deal with him. Glymet said, we also can't let him cause more suffering than what he already did. I am allergic to heroism. I think we should put our hand on some treasure and leave. Swims said. That's what you're thinking about after dragging us with you into this mess? Lonoth kicked Swims' leg. Ah. Sorry, Lonoth. Swims acted childishly around Lonoth, but the serious look on their faces made him stop. Let's move out then. If we head deeper, I am sure we will find him. Glymet didn't seem to be going ahead with the plan anymore and decided to chase Messner right to the deepest of the brass fortress. Wait. We were to use the tools of Kagranak and stop the heart from being exploited. Fighting Messner head-on is outright crazy. Lonoth chased Glymet while saying so. John still has the tools on him, he's taking the dragon far away by now. We can't waste time or Messner will come up with something as annoying as a clockwork dragon. Glymet said as he kept marching ahead. But we faced a real dragon and won. Lonoth retorted, John will only be delayed for a while. Messner is counting on that it seems. He wants us to go after John and rescue him. He's stalling. Glymet replied. His words convinced all the others, but Lonoth had a lingering doubt in her heart. Then, you have a plan? She asked. Screw up whatever Messner is planning, that's a good plan for now. His words made sense, and the group of 5 decided to rush into the Coggitum Centralis, the deepest part of the brass fortress, and where Messner had fortified himself. They didn't meet any resistance on the way except for a few abominations that didn't even slow them down, and once they entered the Coggitum Centralis, the large commanding facility of this realm, they headed to the deepest chamber, the Inner Curiosity. The place seemed abandoned and trashed, but only when they reached the throne-aligned, Sotha Sil's seat of power, when they found utterly nothing. Messenger is not here. Loneth said, I've searched everywhere. You think he found the chamber of the heart? Glymet asked. I don't know. She felt uncomfortable. The memory crystal that showed us how to open it didn't specify its location. It felt rather foreboding how their plan had hit a wall since their adversary was nowhere to be seen. But if they could get to the chamber of Lorcan, they would definitely run into him. The chamber of the throne aligned overlooked the entire brass fortress, and had a great vision of what was going outside as well. If there was anywhere to observe the movements of his enemies, Messenger should have been here. This also means that this place is connected everywhere else, and if Sotha Sil was as vain as the other two members of the tribunals, he should have the chamber of Lorcan near his seat of power, much like how Vivek hanged a meteor in the sky above his palace just to boast. It has to be. It is here. As the group was still starting to look around, Ram seemed to have headed straight to a certain blank wall and touched it with his hand. Ram, you found it? Loneth headed towards Ram, but just as she was about to get close, a mechanism was activated and some sort of artificial illusion was dispelled from the wall. In front of them, they saw the gate of a lockbox, much like the Dwemer lockboxes where the dwarves of old hid their most precious belongings. Incredible! Glymet exclaimed and walked closer. I didn't feel a hint of magicka from that. But as the group gathered around the gate, Ram kept saying the same thing again and again. It is here, it is here, it is here. So much for the quietest member of the party. The others started to look at him as he was getting agitated second by second. What's wrong with him? Swims asked. Ram friend Koda tried to get closer to Ram. It is here. Ram hit the vault door with his two hands and they suddenly phased in. Shit! He's unlocking it! Swims shouted. Stop, Ram! Glymet rushed to hold him. If you unlock it, Messenger would be able to. Click. And it clicked loudly. The sound stopped for a second and everyone looked up. Then a series of clicking cogs started to rotate deep behind the walls. Oh! Swims was the first to turn back while the others were looking ahead. What they saw ahead of them was an intense red light of something quivering, fueled by tremendous energy. What Swims saw behind was the man they were trying to catch. Guys! Swims called, and as the others turned back, they could all see the glee on Messenger's face. At last! Once again you have led me to my quarry. Messenger spoke. My old master ensured I could never break those seals. Thankfully, you have done it for me. Shit! The five were in a bad situation since Ram was about to walk into the chamber for God knows what reason and Messenger was ambushing them from the back. Now it is time you witness my true power. As Messenger said so, cracks started to appear on the ground and the entire floor collapsed. Those who were standing couldn't resist the fall and beneath them was an unfathomable depth. Chapter 688, Clockwork Depths. Chapter 688, Clockwork Depth. Hello, Dawn here. On the 15th of September, 2022, my wedding took place at a local wedding hall near my hometown. I uploaded some photos and a brief of this new phase of life for me. As the clockwork dragon chased John outside the brass fortress and Messenger managed to find a way to the chamber of Lorcan where the mechanical heart is, the party of Glymet had fallen into far depths beneath the heart's chamber. Disoriented, disorganized, and disabled, they weren't able to move freely until they reached a stable ground. Still, as they started calling for one another, they found that they have become separate on top of all in these clockwork depths. And speaking of the Clockwork City, one must always remember that it was built by Sotha Sil, a visionary architect but on top of all, a scientist. This means that as the creator of a world, Sotha Sil has built this world with the process of many trials and errors. It is safe to say that beneath the surface of Clockwork City are innumerable leftovers from previous projects that were covered by other projects until it all turned into one titanic multilayered ruin. This was where Glymet and the other four arrived. Glymet managed to make sure that his surroundings were relatively safe and started to explore everything slowly. He used magelight, candlelight, clairvoyance, and all the spells that can help in this abyssal darkness. The ruins he found himself in seemed to have formed some underground river from some old maintenance pipe. Seeing it meant that either the water came from somewhere or went somewhere. Glymet then used a different set of spells. Sea Stride was always his go-to spell for navigating against the streams, and so he went up the underground river. As he moved from one place to another, Glymet noticed that the upper part of the ruin kept fracturing and collapsing as if he was being haunted by an old architectural curse. If that wasn't the case, the only other possibility is that Messner seemed to have taken control of the mechanical heart of Lorcan and started to reshape Clockwork City. Reshaping a world is a divine act. Talos Stormcrown, Tiber Septim, reshaped the land of Cyrodiil from thick jungles to open meadows. That was the act that proved him as the 9th Imperial Divine. If Messner acquired such power, the mere thought was simply terrifying. There was another idea lurking around Glymet's head as he swam up the river. Recently, he witnessed an Edric ancestral artifact being used, and the power it gave to its user was immense. That was the Eye of Magnus. The Eye of Magnus, the heart of Lorcan, the something of some god. This is not a good sign. John Dare and Loneth were skeptical about the mechanical heart being as almighty as the original heart of Lorcan, but this is not Nirn. This is a different world that can be counted as an independent one. So, what exactly is the heart? Sadly, there is more than one answer, but for that very reason, it is hard to define the heart for what it is. The heart of Lorcan was once the physical heart of Lorcan, the creator god who schemed to create Nirn. It was separated from its owner as punishment for cheating the Edric deities and rendering many of them mortals, but that's just the orthodox answer. The other answers include a stone that was found in the heart of the Red Mountain, the stone of the Red Tower, the source of the tribunal divinity, as well as Dagoth Uar, the core of the engine that powered the mechanical god, the Numidium, the reason why the dwarves disappeared, etc. It's all nice and dandy, but this begs the most important question of all. What does it do? What is it meant for? And why is it so important to the very fabric of reality? Is it like a control device for existence? Switch it on, you exist, switch it off, you non-exist. The dwarves did this non-exist pretty well, it seemed. Then there are the rumored dragon breaks whenever the Numidium is activated with the heart. Nothing is clear when it comes to the heart of Lorcan anyway, so what about the mechanical heart, is it the same? And the Eye of Magnus? And Kano did mention that it had the power to undo existence, and it seemed like a pretty dangerous thing that is awfully similar to the heart of Lorcan in that regard. Fossilized organs of the divines are pretty dangerous, it seems. One wouldn't want to mess with that, especially after what Glymet saw in the eye. His thoughts weren't leading him anywhere, but his recent experience with the Eye of Magnus has taught him one thing. If Messner controls the mechanical heart, just like how Nkano controlled the eye, a tool to subdue the heart is vitally needed, just like what Alina Dare did with the eye using the Staff of Magnus. John Dare did mention that he is the keeper of the tools of Kagranak, the only thing that can override the control over the original heart. If so, they need to get to John and use the tools to prevent Messner from acquiring any more divine power. Now that was the mentality he needed to move forward. Lucky for him, once he reached a large chamber that was being submerged with water, he ran into a familiar lizard. Glym. Swims at night, the Argonian smuggler, was waving at Glymet from the side of the room as he hung to a wall. Fancy meeting you here, a little help here, brother, Swims called. I thought Argonians can breathe underwater, Glymet asked as he used his magic to rise to the surface. I'm perfectly capable of outliving the lot of you underwater, but that's not my current problem, Swims said, then pointed towards a certain direction in the water. Look down there. As Glymet looked, he saw a sight that terrified him. Thanks to the low visibility, he seemed to have skipped that danger while swimming, but now, even he started clinging to walls. There was an entire boarding school of slaughterfish lazily swimming under Swims, and seemed more focused on him, so they overlooked Glymet. Clockwork slaughterfish was just like its usual counterpart, a fish with a crocodile-like head filled with razor teeth, and a long eel-like body that had a lot of fins. "Can you do something about them?" Swims asked. "I can shock them with lightning spells, but this can barely stun them since those pesky slaughterfish are resistant to shock. Also, if one of ours is nearby, they will get stunned too." Glymet replied. "One of ours is nearby, all right. Down there, actually," Swims replied, pointing down at the center of the whirling motion of the slaughterfish. "What? Who?" Glymet asked with a terrified face. "That bastard Ram," Swims said. "We ought to leave him. He opened that door for Messner after all." "No. He had his reasons for sure," Glymet said. "Is there any way to help him out? He's a full metal factotum. How can something like that even swim up for us to help?" Swims argued. "Then we only need his head." John Dare said that he found a functioning head and assembled it with the rest of the body. Glymet said. Yeah, how can we get past the fish though?" Swims asked impatiently. Glymet thought for a second before evoking a lightning rune and casting it on the water. Once the rune exploded, all the slaughterfish were stunned. Glymet and Swims kept watching the fish for a while before it regained consciousness and started moving again. "That's about 12 seconds?" Swims asked. "Yeah. Can you reach Ram, bring his head, and swim up in 12 seconds? Glymet asked. With a long sigh, Swims looked at the water and then at Glymet. "I guess it's time to live up to my name," Swims said and readied himself. "Shock them." Glymet cast another lightning rune that exploded on contact with the fish, and right after, Swims took a straight dive to the depth of the submerging aqueduct. Time passed, 3 seconds, 4, 5, 8, 9. "Hurry, Swims," Glymet called. 10 seconds. One of the slaughterfish started twitching and moving. 11 seconds. A stream came from the water and someone jumped out. 12 seconds. The first fish moved and one jumped from the water high enough to bite on Swim's tail. "Fucking ball." Swims cursed and waved his tail against the chamber wall to hit the fish and cause it to fall. "You alright?" Glymet asked. "I am," hissed damned fish. Swims cursed as he replied and showed Glymet Ram's head. "Got him," he said. "He's with us?" Glymet asked while trying to see whether Ram is responsive or not. "Yo, tin head." Swims shook Ram's head to get him to work. "Sorry." With an apologetic tone accompanied by a mechanical voice, Ram's voice was heard. "Why did you do it, tin head? Why did you open the chamber?" Swims asked with an irritated voice. "Sorry," Ram gave the same reply. "Stop it, Swims. He's just a kid, we'll talk with him once this is over." Glymet spoke. "Yeah, whatever." Swims lowered a knapsack that was hanging on his back and put Ram's head in it. Once the head entered, it started making a metal rustling noise. "What's in there?" Glymet asked. Let's say that recovering Ram didn't take much effort, but this was worth the risk," Swims said with a crafty smile. "What's it?" Glymet asked. A little thing I had my eyes on," Swims said. "Don't worry, I'll share with you. Sharing is caring, no?" "Shut up," Glymet retorted in annoyance. "Now let's get out of here." "Oh yes. Do follow me, good sir," Swims said. "I spotted our way out, but you'll need to stun the fish one more time." As the two managed to swim their way out of the submerged aqueduct, they arrived at a large chamber where they magically ran into another two familiar faces. You two are a sight for sore eyes. Lonoth walked out to them and extended her staff for them to climb out of the water. Coda's with you? Glymet asked. He's over there, she replied while turning in Coda's direction. The small Argonian appeared at the end of a large hallway of some ruined facility. Lonoth seemed to have illuminated the place with magic, and at its end where Coda was, there was a large gate. You can't open it? Glymet asked. It needs a lot of force from 2 directions. Lonoth pointed out, the gate's lock mechanism is based on 2 pistons here and here. I can use all my power to bring one down, but as soon as I let go, it springs back up. Glymet understood. Hey Coda, tell Dragon to come out. Swims called out to Coda, who was desperately hanging to one piston. Go away. Coda doesn't want to speak. Coda replied as he struggled with pulling down the piston that didn't even move an inch. What's with him? Swims asked Lonoth. He switched through all his personalities and they all failed to make the piston budge, so it seemed that they have all insulted him and he is upset about them all. Lonoth replied. And Dragon, the behemoth one? Swims asked. He only comes out in fights. Lonoth replied. So let me get this straight, you can pull one down with all your magicka. So this will take the 2 of us? Glymet asked. Yes, unless you want to rest for a bit first, she replied. I am good. Glymet readied himself. All right, let's do it together. You're on the right, I'm on the left, Lonoth said and stood in place. Hey Coda, come down. Swims called. No, Coda will do it. Coda seemed more stubborn than timid and held onto the piston. Leave him be, Glymet said and mustered all the magicka within him. With a nod, Lonoth and Glymet cast telekinesis and started pulling down the pistons that only corresponded with magic. As the pistons moved, other small pistons started moving inside the chamber ruin and the gate started opening slowly. Ah, I can finally see light. Swims cheered. I'm doing it. Coda's doing it. Coda started shouting as well, wholly unaware that Glymet was the one pulling down the piston. With great effort, Lonoth and Glymet finally pulled the pistons to the threshold that trapped them down. As they were done, the 2 of them sat on the ground from exhaustion. Blessed be the light of Akatosh. Let's get out of here. Swims helped the 2 tired mages up and urged them to walk. Potion. Lonoth offered Glymet her last magicka potion. Thanks. Glymet drank half the amount and returned it to her. As the group started going out of the piston cavern, the gate they opened started to slowly close behind them as the pistons were released from the thresholds and they were on the path of no return, as if any of them wanted to return, to begin with. Still, it was just about time for them to witness what happened to the Clockwork City. Chapter 689, Clockwork Hero. Chapter 689, Clockwork Hero. The Clockwork City was facing a new nightmare, the triumph of Messner. As the new clockwork god, the city was rumbling with his malice and the power of the mechanical heart. The population of the Clockwork City was reduced over the years and yet thousands still lived here, many of which were ordinary people and some were the apostles that upheld the laws of Sotha Sil, his last true group of worshippers. Once Messner got the mechanical heart, the lives of those people were bound to face a change far beyond what they ever bargained for. Every piece of machinery in the city turned on the people, even the factotums that were produced by John were now serving Messner. It is not their commands that were disturbed, but the energy that was powering them now belongs to him, the man sitting on the throne aligned. From outside the city, roars of a clockwork dragon were heard and roars of thunder came in response as John Dare, the Dragonborn, was fighting alone in an endless fight against a machine that was meant for destruction. After Messner got the heart, the clockwork dragon started to rapidly recover all the damage John managed to inflict on it, and its power multiplied greatly. Now the Savior himself needed saving. but far from the depths of the clockwork world, the 5 companions rose from the fall they suffered and took a look at the city. The machines of the brass fortress were now let loose on its people, and whenever one was caught, they weren't killed or tortured. No, they faced a fate way worse than death. Assimilation. Assimilation rate 11%. The loudspeakers of the city buzzed with voices whenever the assimilation of the city went up by 1%. When it reaches 100%, the era or Messner will be the new reality of the Clockwork City. We've got to move. Glymet shouted, now. Into that. Swims tried to hold Glymet's arm. Our escape from this city is narrowing by the second, we can't sit idle more than this. With the tools or without them, Messner must be killed. Lonoth sided with Glymet. You two are mad. Swims looked all around him and for the first time, he was afraid. We came for a treasure, Glym. Yes, Swims. You came for gold and silver. Glymet replied. My treasure, however. Glymet wanted to say something but he only stole a glance at Lonoth, and for a second there, the old man looked so much like his younger self. There wasn't much to say in this dangerous situation. Swims understood Glymet whereas Lonoth was distracted by the danger lurking around them. So, Swims was a little bit at a loss for words. Over there, I am seeing someone. A survivor. Lonoth shouted and ran ahead of them. So? Glymet asked. Nothing. Swims sighed. Don't lose your treasure this time around. At least one of us gets to walk away with something, or someone. Swims ran right after Lonoth and Glymet followed after a second of pause. As they reached the survivor, Lonoth was blasting away at some factotums while Swims at night came and started smashing them with a warhammer. Before even Glymet joins, Coda was already into dragon mode and swept away many factotums with his oversized body. Dragon! Smash! As for the survivor who was seen running from the machines. Set! Save us! Protect us! Hear our prayers! Guide and save your people! He started praying as he seemed to have lost all power. Galen! Glymet called the man who was the head of the Clockwork Apostles. Set! Save us, Set! Take away the darkness! Galen refused to turn to Glymet, and kept holding on to something with both of his hands and prayed with zeal. Hey! Glymet shook the man from his shoulder and caused him to lose focus on his prayers. Just at that moment, an abomination appeared not too far from them, and as it spotted Galen of all people, it rushed towards him. Aeg! Mercy! Only then did Galen lose focus on his prayer and drop on his arse, but with a swift move, Glymet burnt the abominations to ash. As the man was recovering from his shock, Lonoth approached the group with an understanding of what was happening. The magicka in this realm is being siphoned by the heart. The apostles seem to have lost their ability to cast their mechanical magic. Soon it will be our turn, she said. That's terrible. Coda, dragon, said in a dumb voice. It is. Lonoth agreed. On top of that, the people of the city, the machines are remaking them. We have to stop this or else this clockwork dream will turn into oblivion. Thank you, outsiders. Galen stood up with a haggard appearance. Messner is rebuilding the city in his image. More of our people were taken as well to be induced by his twisted ideas. Help us stop him, I beg of you. Anything remaining in the city, aside from the heart, is yours if you manage to do so. The offer was as generous as it can get, but from the looks of it, hope was of short supply at the moment, and a man can even offer his own soul for this scarce commodity. Including this? Swims asked, with his left pointing at something held by the nimble fingers of his right hand. As everyone turned to him, not all of them appreciated the fact that he was gathering riches in this situation, as they all saw a shiny crystal on his right. It was Galen, however, who reacted first. He looked at his own right hand and opened it to see that the item he was just praying with had turned into some common stone from the ground. You! Gallon freaked out immediately. Return it. Realizing that Swims switched his star crystal with a stone, he rushed at Swims, or at least tried to rush at him. However, he was held in place by Glymet. That's a memory crystal. Lonoth soon realized what Gallon had. Please, I beg of you. It is something personal. Return it. Gallon extended his hand, asking for the crystal. Personal? Swims asked. Every time we found one of these, we've learned a lot about the history of this feud between Set and Messner, as well as this heart of Lorcan you people made. Please don't. Gallon seemed desperate somehow. I am just wondering if there is another secret that can help us, Swims said. Please. Gallon begged more, but it seemed that everyone else was on the same page with Swims. He fished out Ram's head from his bag and flicked on it with his finger. Tinhead. Another memory star for you, Swims called. Insert socket. Ram replied as a part of his forehead opened. All right, here we go. Swims put the memory crystal in and the group found a hidden place to watch the memory. A man appeared on the screen. He was tall, gray-skinned, wearing a white clean robe and many other pieces of brass such as a belt, a prosthetic arm, and a half-mask covering the right side of his face. Sotha Sil. It seems that the heart has become unstable again. I think if it was left unchecked, it threatens to destroy the whole city. Sotha Sil appeared to be working on something with his mind busy. He was coming and going multiple times in the chamber he was in. No matter the danger, I must venture into the chamber and devise a way to contain its power. The memory started to fast forward on its own and skipped days of working and tinkering. I pray to myself that I find a solution to this predicament. The heart I created is wild and mindless. It is a step that I thought my own heart would fulfill on its own, but this newborn heart doesn't understand just yet. I am not satisfied with anything. While I can't give my heart to it just yet, it needs to be handled like a child first. To think I, who never fathered a child, shall do so now. Vivek would laugh at me if he heard this. Iam would nag me to no end, however. Sotha Sil's fleeting thoughts slowed down after this, and his voice rang again in his head. A child. He then turned towards a certain door and looked at it for a few seconds with silent thoughts. Immediately, Sotha Sil's eyes widened. Why didn't I think of that? It's all in there. The answers. Sotha Sil darted off his seat, and the memories started to accelerate until they reached a certain point where Sotha Sil was roaming around his lab with a factotum's head in his hand. He then placed a crystal in the head. Show me what you saw, he said. The memories accelerated for a long while this time, and as they stopped, Sotha Sil's voice was heard in an excited tone. Success! He held up his fists. With these tools that I modeled after the tools of Kagranak, I can control, shape, and even dismantle the heart if necessary. In front of Sotha Sil, there were 3 familiar objects: a dagger, a hammer, and a gauntlet. Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard. Although these are replicas of the real things, I made sure that the energy signature of the heart doesn't resonate with the original tools of Kagranak. These, however, are the only things that can control the mechanical heart. Sotha Sil spoke in contentment as he patted the factotum head he was still holding. That's it. Lonoth pointed at the displayed projection and turned to Gallon. You didn't want us to find the tools so that we can't destroy the heart. I beg of you. All will be lost. Gallon cried. If the heart is gone, everything would die. It is what powers our machines, grows our crops, and maintains our world. So it is life itself. Glymet asked. You can say that, but you can't destroy the heart. You mustn't. Gallon spoke as calmly as he could while it was clear he was freaking out. Look around you, man. It's all gone now. Swims said. Only the living matter. It can be saved, all of it. Gallon cried. You're mad. Swims replied. You're really mad. Just take us to the tools. Whatever it is, it has to come to an end at some point. Seeing the resolve and sympathy that Swims conveyed, those around were motivated even more to put an end to this madness. Galen looked up to all of them, hoping that at least one could have sided with him. In the end, he had to give up too. "You're right," Galen said. As he stood, steeled his nerves, and strengthened his resolve, Galen pointed towards where the tools are. "We have to go back to Cogidum Centralis, to the throne aligned," he said. "Where Messener is," Lonoth said. "Messener is with the heart at the inner curiosity. He can't leave it unchecked during the assimilation." Galen said, "We can sneak in and reach the throne aligned. Once we're there, we can harness the throne to access its inner mechanism." Sotha Sil used the throne as a machine to store his notes and memories. It is the only thing that can lead us to the tools. "And how exactly can we sneak there?" Lonoth asked. "Currently, we are hiding at the Caminus pit. There is no machinery in here, so we are safe for now. Lucky for us, there is a secret passage to the Cogidum Centralis called the Shaft of Sola not too far from here. I suspect it may be crawling with these abominations, but since no one is there, the assimilation won't be focused on that area, and even if we fight them, we can pass them unnoticed by Messener." "Are you sure of this information?" Glymet asked. "The shaft was opened around 20 years ago when we were trying to do maintenance work. Even Messener wouldn't suspect that we were foolish enough to open a back door to the Cogidum Centralis and leave it as it is," Galen said. "And his monsters wouldn't report to him?" Swims asked. "They aren't sentient, not yet anyway," Galen said. "Then we go to the shaft." Glymet decided, "This will be our best hope to destroy the heart. May Set forgive us all." Galen lowered his head and murmured in regret. The path to the shaft was mostly quiet as the group moved stealthily without confronting any monster or even saving any Clockwork citizen. Once Messener is defeated, restoration can be possible. Just like Galen said, the Cogidum Centralis had some digging work near its back. The best way to not allow anyone to hide in these parts was to spread some abominations around the dig site, and that is what Messener seemed to have done. As for the shaft tunnel, it was visible from where the group hid. "This seems like a good opportunity," Glymet said. "I am going in first, and once everything is clear, I'll give you a signal. Lonoth and Galen should come first, then Swims and Coda." "All right." Lonoth nodded. "Good luck," Swims whispered. Glymet took in a deep breath and nimbly jumped into the dig site, then started to run a few nimble steps before entering the shaft tunnel. Once he made sure it was clear from danger, he waved out and hid in the tunnel again. Lonoth cast Muffle and Invisibility on herself and Galen, then the two walked down the dig site slowly. They could see a few abominations that were once people of this city. Those abominations seemed to have turned into large-headed monstrous beings with metallic limbs, and were preying on the dead. The sight almost made them both throw up, but they held it in and ran towards the shaft tunnel. Lastly, it was Coda and Swims at night-night. Swims was nimble just as much as Glymet, if not better. He carried the small-bodied Coda in his arm, and jumped on the scaffoldings without making a sound before landing like a caveat. He then started to move slowly and carefully before attempting to dart into the shadow of the shaft tunnel. But just then and there, disaster struck. Above the entrance of the tunnel was an abomination that seemed to have watched it all from the beginning. A chameleon-like abomination with a large snake head and skin that can take the appearance of the surface it stands on. Swim's senses screamed at him just as he was at the range of danger, and by pure instinct, he tossed Coda into the tunnel and lounged to the side. Where he was just now was a pool of acidic spit, and the abomination that was aiming for him made itself visible at last. Swims. Stealth was usually overrated, and in this situation, Glymet and Lonoth found no leeway other than to jump out and help their friend. With a swift cantrip, Lonoth pushed the abominations far from Swims and made it land awkwardly. With a clean slice, Glymet beheaded the fallen monster. Shit! Swims recovered immediately and looked around him with wide eyes and a dry mouth. He took his spear and tossed it at the nearest abomination, then took out his saber and cut the one after it. To the tunnel! Quickly! Glymet tried to pull Swims from the strap of his belt. Once we go in there, they'll flood after us. Swims said, I'll buy time, you block the tunnel. No. You'll die. Lonoth shouted at him. And you all won't. Swims replied as he spotted 2 more abominations rushing at them on their arms and legs. I'll hold them off. Lonoth stepped forward, but the moment that she did, Swims hit her head with the pommel of his saber. What are you doing? Glymet's eyes widened. Without any resistance, Lonoth collapsed to her knees. Swims immediately carried her and tossed her on Glymet's shoulder. Go. Now. Go. Wait. We can do this. I said go. Swims turned and slashed 2 monsters before pushing Glymet into the tunnel and retreating. He then took off his large bag, tossed Ram's head to Coda, and then took out something else. I always wanted to try this one out. In his hand, Swims had the Gatling cannon which Ram used before. Swims! Hey! Swims at night turned his back to Glymet and aimed up the Gatling cannon, never expected to die a hero. And with a smile, you lot better make this count. Swims at night had come to the Clockwork City seeking its riches. But in the end, he gave his life in the hopes of saving it, or at least, of protecting his friends. With a buzzing hail of Gatling fire, shrieks of maddened monsters, and shouts of glory, Swims at night died a Clockwork hero. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.